What's going on, y'all? This podcast is brought to you by Modern Roots Life. Modern Roots Life is a Christian-owned and operated company, and it's bringing real health back to its roots. They offer powerful, all-natural health supplements such as beef liver, cod liver oil, beef tallow, magnesium, and mineral-rich salts, all sourced the way God intended. Clean, simple, and from the earth. So whether you're looking to boost your energy, restore mineral balance, or just fuel your family with real nourishment, Modern Roots Life has got you covered. Guys, in this community, we're trying to get healthy in our mind, in our body, and our spirit. So don't neglect your health. If you want more information, check out modernrootslife.com and check the link in my description. You know, people often ask me how they can support me. Well, I think it's pretty cool if you can support me by supporting the people who support me, and you get something in return. And being healthy is a pretty good return. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the podcast. Once again, I'm your host, JT, and I've got a special treat today. I've got Ben from the End of the World News is back on the show. What's going on, Ben?
Hey, everything is good. You know, I figure every day I wake up with breath. God has a purpose, regardless of how crazy the world gets. But thank you for having me back on the show. And I just wanted to give a shout out to your fans real quick. I know last time when you posted the last time we did it, man, your group chat was on fire. You guys got a lot of good people to listen to you.
Yeah, we got the best. We got the best. So maybe I'm biased, but I don't think that I'm being biased. I think that the community here that we have on YouTube and you know, across all the social media platforms, a lot of the same people here are here, and they're the most reasoned, well-researched, probably best-looking group out of all of them. So yeah, I give them a shout out all the time. I appreciate all their support. But yeah, that was a great podcast we did last time. I know we were talking about symbolism between like kind of the shields of these ancient families and then the three-letter agencies. And I think I had Ben come back on because Ben is really great when it comes to maybe deciphering all the code and all the yuck in the modern politics and geopolitical things. And this is going to be a little bit different because Ben wanted me to come on his show. And so we're going to record the whole thing today. So probably the second half of it, I'm going to let Ben take over the interviewing part of the show, and then he's going to interview me. But first, we're going to just start with, so where do you want to start? Because I know that we were talking about off air about Venezuela. We have stuff with AmFest, or as I like to call it, HamFest. And we even have stuff going on in Israel again. And even there's some new news about, you know, it's not new news, but it's coming back up, is the idea that Trump wants Greenland again.
Yeah, I almost wonder if he took Venezuela to see how the American people would react, to see how the world would react for his greater ambitions, which would be taking in Greenland, which lines up with the 10 technates that the technocrats want to usher into this world, which is really interesting.
Well, it kind of goes back to what was it, the North American, you know, idea with the what did they call that back in the day? When the trade program where they wanted all of North America to be a thing.
NAFTA.
Yeah, NAFTA, that's right. Yeah, NAFTA is just kind of going back to that kind of playbook where it's the borders, the sovereign borders are really kind of erased when it comes to the merchants and the technocrats. Like they want a free trade, which of course free trade sounds good, but of course, like all their words, it really just means that they're going to outsource the labor and the American people are going to get the shaft at the end.
Yeah. And it also goes back to the Club of Rome. There's an interesting article, I believe it was in the New York Times in the 1970s, where they had this big meeting with the Club of Rome. And they were talking about how to solve the problems that they saw today, or of the time of the day, that the world government would have to break up into 10 regions, similar to the 10 technates that the technocrats talk about. And what was interesting, they said, if we don't solve this problem through these 10 trading regions that they want to develop, then the world is going to be ushered into a technocracy. Their words, not mine. And this was in the 1970s.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I know a lot of people, as we said, like whether you're a premillennial or a postmillennial, it bears just being focused on what they're actually trying to do. Because I know when I had a premillennial view, when they were talking about breaking the world up into like 10 different parts, you think about in the book of Revelation, it talks about there's 10 kings that hadn't arrived yet. And yeah, so you got 10 kingdoms. And yeah, like I guess it's regardless if you believe we're after the millennial reign or before it, it could be that certain people are still trying to push this same agenda that does look the same. And again, it's like a typology, it's a repeating pattern, as Solomon said. So that's interesting. But yeah, I think it's interesting, like the language they're using about the way some people who were obviously Trump himself against regime change, right? But now there's this new phrase. It's like, what's in our hemisphere? And so everybody's talking about our hemisphere. Like that's the thing we talk about all the time. So yeah, if you mention Venezuela, well, Greenland's in our hemisphere too. So
Yeah, I think he coined it the the Don, what was it, the Monroe,
the
the
Donroe Doctrine, is that what
yeah,
it's
the
called?
Donroe Doctrine. His foreign policy, making it all about himself, which is pretty funny. But yeah, it was interesting to see them go into Venezuela, and it happened at nighttime. And when I found out in the morning, I was, searching through social media, and one of the first posts I saw was from Nat Rothschild. And
Okay.
let's just say if your opinions align with his agenda, they're probably wrong. And he was in full support of this. He was like, Venezuela Libre, way to go, Donald Trump. And what was interesting is, and I don't want to say surprising, because I think they all serve the greater global agenda. They might put some lipstick on a pig, but at the end of the day, it's still a pig. And, Nick Fuentes he
Right.
supported this. Alex Jones, supported this. And they, disguised it as this is good for American imperialism. But you can't overlook how we're interlocked, or at least our agenda is also interlocked with that of the Rothschilds, interlocked with that of NATO and all the bloodlines that control it. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing that where I think you and I really find common ground. Not that we don't see eye to eye about most things, but the people like Nick Fuentes and I mean Trump himself, even George W. Bush, he ran on no nation building, like way back in the day. And then, everybody knows what happened after that. It was like Iraq was this giant boondoggle where defeating their army was not enough. It was actually trying to make sure that democracy flourished in Iraq. And when everybody heard about that, they're like, this sounds a lot more complicated than them just blowing up their tanks and stuff because we got the best jets, the best bombs, we got the best everything, but we can't even control our own government. So like how the heck are we going to establish a new one in a place that's, a world away? So now lots of people, I want to say like probably the first Republican to really come out against all that stuff was probably Ron Paul. And it was really unpopular at that time because it was just like, oh, you support the terrorists if you're not for these wars. And then later, Donald Trump, I guess because he was kind of more like maybe like a Bill Clinton Democrat. You know what I mean? Like, because if you actually hear speeches from Bill Clinton back in the day, he would be extreme right, compared to normal politicians. So that's kind of seemed like that's where kind of Trump stayed for a while. And so, yeah, when he came out in 2016, he was just railing on Jeb Bush and pinning all that stuff on his brother and his family. And that's where people are like, oh, right on, right on. Like, yeah, this is good. We're done with all these foreign wars, these foreign entanglements. And now when you hear all the people again thinking 2020 was going to be the same, or not 2020, but 2024 second term was going to be a lot like the first one, where no, like that all the things they were promoting, and like Nick Fuentes himself, I want to say people were pulling up old tweets of his, and it was just like months ago he was talking about how bad idea it would be to invade Venezuela and engage in some kind of regime change. And now he's like, well, yeah, this is promotes the good of America, imperialism. This is good. It's in our hemisphere. And now, yeah, you can just see it's these people are neocons. Like the neocon agenda is still it's like the John Bolton doctrine, not not the Don Rowe doctrine. It's the John Bolton doctrine where it's like they never found a war they didn't like, and now you have like MAGA became Lindsey Graham's foreign
Yeah.
policy.
You gotta love America's foreign policy. We run around with AK-40s and drop bombs as we yell, democracy, democracy. And, I look at Donald Trump the same way I look at Alex Jones. Now, I personally think Alex Jones was like a 30+ year operation where he gave the people partial truths to gain their trust. He still had his obvious blind spots towards Israel,
Mhm.
which is why they called him a shill. But ultimately, I think that he was meant to gain their trust so then they could then usher, the opposition into the golden age as he started shilling for Trump, as he started shilling for Elon and technocracy and stuff like that. And I view Trump the same way as his, change of position. He railed against it. He gave us the word magic we needed to hear to think that he was our guy, a total wolf in sheep's clothing. Meanwhile, he was always following the agenda. I think they just got to keep us docile so we don't rebel against him.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you see people like, just say, Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones, because I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever listened to a full episode of InfoWars with him. I've never watched a whole episode of America First with Nick Fuentes. So when you just isolate it to certain clips, you're like, oh, this guy seemed actually very reasonable, very smart. And like, of course, Alex Jones, how he got all these things right over the years, like that's probably, we're guessing that he did have some inside information about things. But I think that's the thing. So like, I can't really say for sure how truthful they were the whole time. Because you know what I mean? Like when you listen to people, like let's say you listen to him for like a month, you'd probably start to see the contradictions. And like a guy like Nick Fuentes, who tries to carry himself as some kind of moral person, you know,
Yeah.
a Roman Catholic, but he was like cheerleading for killing people and stealing their oil. So that's not, obviously it's not Christian. And of course, just the way that certain people treat each other online, you're just saying like, well, there's no fruit there. This is, or there's fruit, but it's bad fruit. It's not good fruit. And we know Jesus said that a good tree cannot produce bad fruit. So, I mean, that's kind of who they are. But yeah, like that he really, particularly right after the Charlie Kirk thing, he really flipped hard, it seemed like, because you would have expected him to be the one who was going hardest after Israel. But instead, he is going after people who are going after that rabbit trail that might lead to the Netanyahus and the Hasbara misinformation and Mossad and all that stuff. And so like he's thinking these people are low Q anti-Semites. That's his phrase. And then you have Alex Jones, where I mean, ultimately, if you listen to a whole show of Alex Jones, I remember I listened to him when he was on Rogan, like the very first time. It was actually a pretty great episode. It was really funny. And he says a lot of things. You're like, well, he's not as crazy as his reputation is. But then he'll say some stuff that is just right off the wall. So, I mean, I guess maybe has that always kind of been who he was?
Yeah, I mean, I think he stole a lot. He told a lot of truth, but leading into, the final Trump administration, he's totally, pushing the party line. And what's real interesting to me is the hypocrisy amongst the America First crowd supporting this invasion into Venezuela to take their oil or to, get rid of their state bank to get them back onto one of the central banks. Because their whole shtick is that it's America first. We hate foreign influence, particular Israeli influence in our government, the influence of AIPAC. But on the same note, they're doing the exact same thing in Venezuela.
Right.
And I think you have to be consistent. The one thing I hate is hypocrisy, right?
Right.
And either you believe in foreign intervention and manipulating other countries or you don't. So like I said, it's still a pig. They just slap some lipstick on it. They say it's for America's interest, but make no mistake about it, our interests interconnect with this global cabal's interests.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that was interesting, we just actually recorded JT's mixtape yesterday, and we talked a little bit about Venezuela. And we were talking about how Maduro had like 4 outfit changes.
Yeah.
What was up with that?
I don't know. And I even heard someone saying, I like all the conspiracies that come out. I kind of laugh at them. Somebody said it was actually Saddam Hussein that they repackaged.
Right. Well, he definitely resembles him. Of course, if Saddam Hussein is still alive, he probably looks a lot different than Maduro looks like today. I mean, he looks like 1990 Saddam Hussein.
Yeah. Yeah,
Eh,
that's the one thing I always wrestle with. It's because I think this is all political theater to a certain extent,
mhm.
but how much of it is real? And to the point that, he had 4 different outfits in a matter of 12 hours. Something seems off about that. I know we saw the missiles going down and the fires coming up, but I mean, how do you sack a country in just 3 hours? One with the military, with no rebellion. I almost wonder if they really sent the guy up a limo and everything is for show. I really don't know.
No, actually, I that's the thing that makes sense to me is that he was not arrested, he was extracted, and he left of his own volition. Because if you really think about it, you got this communist dictator, and he's got people gunning for him all the time.
Yeah.
If it was this easy, wouldn't we have got Fidel Castro a long time ago? Like when
Yeah,
they were
right.
trying to get him for years, and they just, yeah, I mean, like it's the quickest war ever. They just go in there and then just take this guy out, but they also take his wife, right? So that kind of makes it seem like that. Yeah, he had his bags packed, he had all his outfit changes, and they wanted it to present it as. I guess that's the one part that actually how they did present it, because I'm sure a lot of people would are asking the exact same questions as we are. What's up with the outfit? Like, would they say like, "Hey, just pick what you're gonna wear"? But then
Yeah.
he's like, he's giving the thumbs up in pictures, and the craziest part was when they were driving around in that van, and they had the back of the van open up so they could, so people could see him.
Yeah.
Like, what's up with that?
Hey, wag the dog, right? And what's also interesting is that the person who's going to be the interim president is still part of the Maduro regime. I think she's like the head oil finance or the oil minister or whatever. And there was a video of her talking how she's like, yeah, this has a Zionist tinge to it, right? She's like, this is who really attacked us. But hey, Maduro's regime is largely still in charge. I don't know if she's going to work with us, if she's really a sheep's in wolf clothing, and maybe she is, right? I think the first thing to die in war is the truth on both sides, and each side says whatever they need to say to get the consent of the people. So I think we'll have to see what actually unfolds, but I think this just applies another pressure point on the global stage that I think might be part of this breaking down of the global system that we have so they can then build this one world technocratic government that I think the Georgia Guidestones talked about.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I want to say that didn't she come out like really pro-Israel? That like, because
Oh,
obviously, because
oh
she
no,
was.
that was the person that they want, but the person who's currently in charge was part of the Maduro regime. She was like
Okay,
the oil
okay.
minister.
So are they going to let that woman stay in charge? Yeah, because the woman I was talking about, she was talking about moving their embassy to Jerusalem, and she was definitely rah rah Israel. And I saw this clip from I think it was 2009, and it was a man talking with. They were discussing how that out of all the Western countries, like the biggest problem in this hemisphere was Venezuela, because they were like the one country that was aligned with Iran, and then so they had to go. Like this regime had to go.
Did you see the Jack Ryan clip that came out?
N-
Where this is from like 2 or 3 years ago, and he's speaking probably to someone within the CIA or a class within the CIA, and he goes, "Who do you think is the biggest threat to America?" And people are like, "Russia, China," and then he goes, "No, Venezuela. They have the largest oil reserves. They have the most gold reserves." Maybe just this idea of predictive programming. Maybe it's all part of this magic trick of manifesting the reality, but it was definitely there.
Well, the interesting part is that I haven't heard anyone really bring this up, but one of the good things that Trump did in his first term was that he did get us really largely off dependence on foreign oil. Remember, like he was
Yeah.
really like about like obviously we have the amount of reserves under America is probably more than any other place. Like, but they don't really mention that. So like we could have all the oil independence we needed, but that also is not really beneficial when we have the dollar as our currency. Because there's this artificial scarcity to this resource, which if you hear from like real oil execs, they'll actually tell you that I forget the I always bring up there was a I saw this video about this, and this one oil guy was saying that oil is the second most common liquid on the whole earth or under the earth. Like there's oceans of it under there.
Oh,
So
you
they,
don't
of
think
course,
they're dinosaur fossils?
well, it is interesting to think like where it came from. We actually discussed that yesterday about how what if it is kind of remnants of like this old world that's like it is the decay of it. It's like this black magic that's under there. It's all based on all these dead things. But no, I mean it could be dragon stuff, but I mean who knows? I mean, because the truth is, it's like all the other kind of resources that there's artificial scarcity to it, so then it's worth more, right? Because these people are about their profits, so they're not really going. They don't want to help us. Is the point?
Yeah.
So it's a totally naive or just a disingenuous take to say, oh, we're going to take Venezuela's oil, and then the American people are going to benefit. Well,
Yeah.
maybe a few American people, but not the majority of them. It's going to be oil executives are going to get more rich. But the rest of us, no, we are not going to benefit from another war.
Well, I think also it's the bankers, right? Because didn't the bankers initially finance all the oil drilling in Venezuela before, they took it, they made it a communist country? And maybe they're trying to recoup what they initially put in there or what
Very
they owe to the central
possible.
banks.
What is interesting to think about, like the kind of the origins of communism too, is that when there was the Russian Revolution, a lot of the powerful like robber barons were behind it, which really doesn't make like if the history were told the way that communists are and what their goals are, it really makes no sense that the most powerful capitalists in the world would want to prop up a communist state. But when they did that, then I want to say that like John D. Rockefeller and them laid all the pipelines and stuff in Russia.
Yeah.
So it was actually a Christian monarchy that was preventing them from doing that.
Yeah, I think that Gary Wayne talks about that a lot with the Bolshevik Revolution. It was really a war between Eastern and Western Masonry, and these bloodlines fight with each other. And maybe we can pull that back to what happened in Venezuela. Just because I'm not for foreign intervention or kidnapping a leader or pretending to kidnap a leader, that doesn't mean I agree with Maduro. That doesn't mean I agree with the people who are opposing this. And you can use examples like China, which is a communist country. They came out and opposed it. And they're part of the greater global agenda too, right? If you look at them, they have the new champions meeting every single year there in the summer, which is titled New Davos, or Summer Davos. You have Russia, who is part of the global agenda too, is calling this out. I mean, they named their vaccine after a fake satellite in their fake space program, the Sputnik, fake scene, fake satellite. And so they're all part of the greater global agenda. And I really look at it like the Game of Thrones. I think there's a lot of truth in that show and how the world really operates. Because in that show, what do you have? You have these bloodlines that control the realm. Some are related to each other. They intermarry with each other. And they jock for position. They battle for control over the realm. And they all take their genealogy back to the dragons, which you see today.
Right.
And, they take them back to the seraphim that came down here.
No, actually, that's a good call. That's the funny part. And I think that me and Aaron were just talking about that the other day about how I think the one thing that people in this community, when they get too conspiratorial, I think they get confused is they think that, well, there's this one kind of singular agenda with all these people, but I don't think it's like that. I think it's more like Game of Thrones. Because if you really think about it, in that show, the people are only as really loyal as the much power as they have. Right, because they'll knife somebody in the back if they can, if they can get away with it. And I think that's kind of why the forces of darkness are really only aligned based on power, greed, and fear. So there's not a lot of love between all those people. So that when the devil is kind of their lead, he has no problem stabbing people in the back and stepping over people to get what he wants. So I think that that's exactly what's happening. So a show like that is very, because it's not like that it's just good versus evil. The evil is going against each other, and there's really no real good players on this chessboard. And and the ones who are the ones who are really going to get knifed in the back first because they can't be controlled because they are good.
Yeah, I'm with you. When there's that saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." No, when it comes to geopolitics, the enemy of your enemy is another satanic bloodline as well, right? And they're just jockeying for position. And, whether we are premillennialists and this is Satan's kingdom, or we're in Satan's short season and he's, deceiving all of us by controlling all the governments, in my opinion, I just don't think we should support any of this stuff. And like you said, judge a person by the fruits they bear. And all these world leaders, they all oppress their people. They all steal money from the coffers. I just don't think they're of God at all, or
No,
anybody in a position of power.
no, it is interesting though. I want to say that Tucker Carlson was talking about the fact that in Venezuela, abortion's illegal, like transgender surgery's illegal, gay marriage is illegal. What else is illegal? Usury is illegal. And I also wonder if like that's the real big issue, that reason he had to go. And as you said, that if the bankers had some kind of stake in this, that if you can't lend money at interest in Venezuela, well, that to me is something I've seen historically, that world leaders who try to advocate for interest-free loans, those people go real quick. That in trying to go back on some kind of gold standard.
Oh yeah, I forget there was a list that someone put out about the 7 countries that still have state-ran banks, and it was like Libya, Somalia, Venezuela. All of them have been attacked by the Israeli Western Alliance over the past 10 or 15 years. So I don't think it's a coincidence that they went into Maduro. But when it comes to that type of stuff, I wonder if that's just more word magic, because I think each population is different, and they, do something different to get their trust. Because I'll just point to someone like Vladimir Putin, who I think is totally tied to this thing. I remember he came out at maybe a month ago, and it's like, we're fighting Satanism. We're going to put an end to Satanism and stuff like that. And people are like, see, he's a good guy. But like I said, he's part of the greater global agenda. So I wonder how much of that is, he might be doing it, but does he really want it? Because behind the scenes, what is he really doing?
Yeah, I guess that's again the I don't trust. I mean, obviously, I clearly don't trust him. But it is interesting to think like
Yeah.
what's happening in Russia and Poland. I mean, they are largely returning to some kind of a Christian tradition in those places, which I think is interesting because Russia was, when it became the Soviet Union, like Christianity was being outlawed. Like you couldn't be a Christian there. And so now they're really returning to kind of that idea of maybe what it was like before with the Romanovs. And so then again, I don't think that it was necessarily good or perfect or anything like that, anything close to that. But I think that's kind of interesting, even like biblically. There was no perfect kings in Israel either, even when even when they were trying to serve God. So that God is the one who gives men authority to rule over nations. So He is sovereign. So I guess that's the thing. I try not to be so cynical now because I agree that these people are interconnected in all kinds of different ways, and they all have their agendas. But when I do see like more Christians and more churches popping up in places like that, I guess I can't say I don't want to be so cynical where I'm saying, "Oh, well, that's a bad thing." I think that ultimately it's a good thing. But as you said too, we were talking about how there was the pipelines, kind of like that Rockefeller established in Russia, and even so, the idea was one of the main reasons was for the whole sphere of influence, like this hemisphere, right? Like we need to get Venezuela because they're aligned with China and Iran, and we don't want China to get their oil. But then a reporter was asking about China, and Trump was like, "Oh yeah, we're in the oil business, so we're going to be selling to China." And you're like,
They're all
it's really funny because I want to say that during the whole time where like the Ukraine Russia stuff was like the hottest, where that war was happening, that we're told about like NATO. And so NATO is this idea where that if Russia attacks a NATO country, then all NATO has to go to war with Russia. Meanwhile, one of the countries that's benefiting most from the United States participation in NATO is Germany. And at the same time, Germany had created this massive deal with Russia for natural gas.
Yeah.
And you're like, that does not seem like it makes sense. It's like if you really consider them a threat like that, why would you ever count on them for your energy production?
Or why would you pump money into their coffers, just making them more powerful?
Right, right.
Um,
There's all kinds of places you could buy natural gas from. Like, why are you buying it from supposedly one of your biggest existential threats and
Yeah.
historical enemies. It's because
Or
yeah,
e-
like it is like the yeah, I agree. It's like Game of Thrones.
yeah. Or even with China, right? That's who Trump goes, China, China. And we still have strong trading relations with them. Now, I wonder how much longer that will last for. Over the past 10 or 20 years, they've quietly gathered up all the natural resources. I think they're responsible for all the base materials made in pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. And I wonder in this Game of Thrones, at some point, is China going to cut that off? And, we talked about this before the show. China's been talking about going into Taiwan for a long time, and they've been pretty consistent on the year. And it was 2026. And in their speech, or the New Year's Eve speech, Xi came out and said, yeah, it's on the table. We're going to do it this year. And I wonder if they do it. I don't, there's only so long you can say you're going to do something. And then if you don't do it, the people will just like lose interest and you don't have that control over them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are really trying to leapfrog America in this, battle for power, I mean, that would be the perfect time before I say we, but, before America has built up, the chips factories and stuff like that, because we're so dependent on Taiwan for our computer chips that pretty much run everything. And you would think that, China might break away from that soon.
Yeah. So, what would you think? I mean, do you think that? I mean, I don't see that the American people would have the stomach to try to fight a war to protect Taiwan. So,
Well,
like,
I don't think
what do you think that what do you think the response from America and the Western countries would be if China actually does try to go through with that?
yeah, that's a tough one because when you look at some of the drills that they are doing, and I don't know how much of it's all AI, and I don't really know how strong China's military really is, but it seems like they would sack that a lot faster than what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. And, Trump has come out and said, we're not going to allow you to do this. And I think that's been, America's official position. So I wonder, and I've been talking about this for a while, because first you had, Russia and Ukraine popped off, and then you had that short war with Iran and Israel. You've had the longer war, or let's just say genocide between Israel and Gaza. But I always thought that China going into Taiwan might be that final, like, high impact event where we get drawn into that, and not just by proxy. We might actually send our ships. They're cruising the China Sea all over the place. I wonder if that sets off this, World War III possibly that I think they're trying to usher in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's that I don't really leave anything off the table, but I just know that the American people are not going to be about that. I
Now,
don't think we can afford. I don't think we can. I don't think most people feel like we have the stomach for more war. We definitely don't want a war. I mean, the way they try to sell us to these wars too is that, just like I said, if I was old enough to grow up like during Desert Storm, and so I was like in middle school, and when that happened, we saw that we're like, oh, war's really not all that scary because we're so much better than everyone else. But we always knew kind of back in those days, especially that was kind of maybe at the a little after the Cold War. But we never wanted to go to war with Russia. It's not like that we didn't think we could win, but if we did fight them, it would be tough. There'd be a lot of losses on our side. So the idea that oh yeah, in our sphere or hemisphere, we can just go down in there and just take out Venezuela. I mean, that's no big deal for the United States military. But trying to fight China would be like, there's a lot of those Chinese people. Like, how many people do they got? I mean, yeah, we don't even know how strong their military is. I imagine it's pretty strong, though. There would be no pushover. So, what I would hope that it wouldn't come to that. But at the same time, what I could probably see is just more like trade war and sanctions and things like that. And that would cause us to suffer, right? Because
yeah,
we are so dependent on China and Taiwan.
yeah, I'm with you. I don't think the American people want more war. And I think that also aligns with this, I guess I would call the transformation into this America First Christian nationalist movement from the Zio evangelical Jewish control over all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all manufactured. And I think when if Trump does this, this will definitely, douse some gasoline on that public sentiment as far as, getting rid of this, Zionist control or influence in America.
Yeah, that's a nice transition to we were talking about Amfest, or as I was calling it, Hamfest,
Yeah.
and the battle between the idea of like maybe the soul of the Republican Party and the right wing in general. Like, what does it mean to be a right winger now? Right? Because you seem like, and I feel like that this has really kind of cut between even the parties too, where it's like you have the people who support Israel and you have the people who do not support Israel. And like, so then it doesn't even matter. Like a lot of these issues that I've seen, I've had more common ground with people like the young Turks than I do have with the Daily Wire, which is
Yeah.
crazy, which is crazy to me. But I mean, that's like historically, you listen. I used to back in the day when I was into more into the politics stuff. I would tune into the Young Turks after the Republicans won an election just so I could hear them cry about it.
Yeah.
But now I'd like listen to them because they're actually talking about some of the same things about like the war in Gaza, the Epstein files, all the kind of things where they are not afraid to trash Democrats because that they're controlled. In the same way that we're not afraid to trash Republicans who are very clearly compromised, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
Dan Bonginos and people like that.
Did you see he just came out? He retired from being the head of the FBI, and he's now on a public crusade against black pillars, which is just another term for the truth.
That is, talk about just salt in the wound, just spitting in somebody's eye. You're like, do you know why that people are black pilled, Dan? I think they might be black pilled because they thought that Trump was going to do some of the things he said he was going to do. And also the fact that he appointed you and Kash Patel, who people actually thought you guys were going to do something as well. You guys were all about the Epstein stuff. So when you get in there and you tell him, you know what? He actually did kill himself and he didn't traffic children to anyone. That is why people are black pilled. So you're really rubbing it in, the salt in the wound there when you're blaming. It's like victim shaming.
Yeah. But I think people are noticing this, and I think this is all part of the plan. And back to Amfest, when I watched that, what I watched was the social suicide of Ben Shapiro. And I wonder how manufactured that was. I don't think it was a coincidence that he was the second person to speak after Erica Kirk. And what he did was he started attacking everybody who was officially questioning the narrative of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And he was calling them names and stuff like that. But that set up the rest of Amfest, where they just took turns teeing off against Ben Shapiro. And then it did.
Yeah.
They just let him have it. And the internet went wild with it.
Supposedly, Ben Shapiro bought his place on the stage. Like it is kind of crazy to think he must have gave a lot of money to be the speech right after Erica Kirk.
Yeah. Oh, a ton. And what happened as a result? You had guys like Steve Bannon coming out and calling him little Benji Shapiro.
Calling him a
you
cancer.
Can't handle the truth. That's what he said. And then he brought up stuff like the Greater Israel Project, which was a lot of truth bombs for that place. Now, it wasn't received the way it was received on the internet at home, but that was a lot of truth bombs. And then you had Megyn Kelly come out, who, worked for the mainstream media her entire life, calling out Ben Shapiro. And who really listens to Ben Shapiro anymore? In fact, if you're on the internet, if you're not of a certain age demographic, who really listens to the entire Zionist movement anymore? I don't think very many people. And I think that this is all, like I said, I think this is all manufactured. I think they send out the worst people like Laura Loomer that just make you want to throw up on purpose. So you become disillusioned with it because, like I said, I think at the end of the day, part of the greater global agenda is this manufacturing or pretending like this is happening, this Ezekiel 38:39, where the nations turn on Israel.
Well, I think that, honestly, I believe some of this is real because I think that, truth be told, I actually listened to Ben Shapiro back in the day, like probably back in the beginning of Trump's first term. I was listening to him, but I found him so grating even back then. It would be like sometimes it's kind of like even Charlie Kirk when he was debating like blue-haired feminists. It's like, of course you're picking these people that obviously you can totally trash. Like, you're so much, you're for one, you're old. Well, I mean, I guess Charlie Kirk wasn't that much older than them, but he's picking on people that obviously he's going to destroy easily, and that's what Ben Shapiro used to do. They would go to college campuses, and he would pick the most unreasonable people, and then he would be calm, and he'd heard these arguments a million times, and he would look really smart doing it. But then actually listening to him on like his full podcast, he had this kind of air of just such arrogance and condescension for most people, even including Trump, because he would always be like, Trump is the biggest, dumbest idiot. But it's almost like Ben Shapiro seems like the guy who got stuffed into lockers back when he was in high school, right? So he's like looking at Trump like the captain of the football team, right? And he's just like, he just hates him, despite the fact that Trump, he's a lot of things. I don't think he's stupid, right?
Yeah.
So like that's not really, he comes off as dumb. He comes off as oafish, but he's not stupid. And I remember always just feeling like that when we were going really through like the cancel culture stuff and the woke stuff, and it was like the Daily Wire would play heavily on the fact that, oh, people are being racist against white people, and facts don't care about your feelings and all that kind of stuff. So if I'm quoting statistics about certain race demographics, well, you guys can't get upset about that. And they would always be coming after people playing the race card. And then it's like, as soon as somebody said anything, even that resembled a slap at Israel, the race card did come out. Like the anti-Semite card came out for him. So so all that being said, he's always been like that. Like he's not changed at all. I think the only difference is it feels like that the people have changed. And it's not necessarily from influencers. It's literally that a generation of people have grown up hearing about Israel, or maybe not even hearing about Israel. Like people like of our generations have heard why we need to support Israel. But then when we actually see a bloody conflict like what's happening in Gaza, then that rhetoric just does not, like that dog does not hunt anymore. So it seems like that the people who are anti our relationship with Israel and the war in Israel, I mean, that is the reasonable opinion. So regardless if there's plants in that movement or not. So the opposite side is your Ben Shapiro's, your Laura Loomers, and all the pretty much everybody else. When they are supporting this just garbage, they sound desperate. They sound ridiculous. And I think that that's kind of what it does seem like that's what was playing out at AmFest. But then you have like your Steve Bannons who I would agree with on a lot of issues, but he's compromised as well. So like that, it doesn't mean we trust them, but yeah, like the Ben Shapiro's reaction was just unhinged, and it was just it did seem like, I agree with you, but it did seem like theater, like what we were watching. Like this was like WWE stuff right there.
Hey, just pay attention to how people react, and that's why they do things. And you're right. It's crazy how we fell for Ben Shapiro. I personally never really liked his voice. I always thought he was a little,
100%.
But I mean, he exposed himself like 10 or 12 years ago with a tweet when he says he wants to get rid of the birthright, citizenship rule for presidency so that Netanyahu become president. Like he exposed himself.
That tweet right there, that was one of those ones where I'm sure a lot of things we've seen on the internet, you're like, because especially like you make your own content, just like I do. I was like, is that real? Like, because I wanted to make sure it was real if I ever used that for a video. And I was like, yeah, sure enough, that was real. So when another thing that always gets called anti-Semitic is saying you have dual loyalty to Israel, or maybe, that's the whole idea is like, it's not America first, it's Israel first. And so Ben Shapiro said that what America will always have is loyalty because they are the greatest support of Israel. So it's like you support this country because they support the country you actually support.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said. There is a natural reaction of Christians, believers in the Most High that are looking at what's going on in Israel right now with all the wars and stuff. They're like, nah, this is not for me. And to me, that's the Holy Spirit convicting you.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with that.
And I think that when you see like evangelicals just pushing this, I don't say that they're not real Christians or they don't believe in God, but I think maybe they're have a bigger relationship with their theology, their man-made traditions, and to what they support than actually with God. Because I think the Holy Spirit will convict you, and just whether whatever you think about that place, the amount of bloodshed that's going on, you just can't support that. But what I find interesting is what you brought up. It's then, why are these compromised people, and we can just list them like crazy, who on one hand are exposing the crimes of the Israeli government and the influence that it has within American politics, but at the same time, like in Bannon's case, and we could just name others, are connected to this agenda. I mean, this is public knowledge. You can look this up. He was actually meeting with Epstein to try to rehabilitate his image with a series of videos to get him out of jail. So you got to ask yourself, on one hand, why is he trying to rehabilitate one of their greatest agents or one of their puppets, and at the same time exposing the Greater Israel Project?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I was just thinking about it. Like, maybe here's a possible rationale for that, is that Steve Bannon, not a stupid guy. And so, yeah, when they released some of the pictures from, I guess, whatever they did give us, there was lots of pictures with Epstein and Bannon together. And so what if, when Steve Bannon is like one of the main guys in the Trump campaign in 2016, he knows this stuff's coming. So
Yeah.
what if he wanted to get Jeffrey Epstein out of trouble because he knew that if it ever came back on Epstein, it was always the potential blowback to come on his boss, Donald Trump.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. That's why he did it. But I guess the question is, then why is he trying to expose it now? His boss is still Donald Trump, if you ask me.
Probably because maybe it's there's no other political smart move than to say you want it all out. You know what I mean? Like, you're really looking. Yeah. I mean, then you'll be Dan Bongino. Yeah. Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, and it's like they're absolutely a joke now. I mean, that's a funny thing. We did talk a little bit about that yesterday too, is that, like, the idea that this guy is going to build his podcast off saying, "Oh, release all the Epstein stuff. Don't ever give up." And then he says, when he gets in office, give up. And now he's going to come back to podcasting. And I can't imagine anyone actually listening to him other than just for, like, the train wreck factor of, like, what's he going to say so I can clip it and make fun of it on my podcast. But I want to go back to Amfest a little bit. Some of the stuff that was happening there, and I said it was kind of like WWE. And I mean, like, literally down to the stage and the theatrics and the fireworks and everything. I mean, not too dissimilar to the Charlie Kirk Memorial. But I mean, it seems so out of touch. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I'm saying, like, that I get confused. I'm with you that most of this is theater. But I'm like, I still don't know what am I supposed to think about this. Like, I don't know how this works for their benefit, because they all look crazy doing this, crazy out of touch, with Erica Kirk with the glittering pantsuit coming out to Sparks and talking about JD Vance and having Nicki Minaj out there. It's crazy, right? I mean, like, like, how can that work? Whose benefit is this working toward?
The people who are trying to turn everybody against Israel. I think, because, I mean, if you think about it, she comes out there in these black leather pantsuits, fireworks. She's all over the place. Doesn't look like she's missing her husband at all. You have, Nicki,
she doesn't.
You have Nicki Minaj out there, and people are like, wait a minute, they're losing faith in it, right? So if you lose faith in the Zio movement, currently it's the Zio movement, if you lose faith in it, where are you going to turn towards next? Well, I mean, to me, the obvious choice, and not that I subscribe to this, but what I see people doing is more of this Christian nationalist feel. And I think that's setting this up to become a Christian nationalist country.
Well, to play the other side of that a little bit, that obviously they had people who were not Zionists on the stage, but why wouldn't more of them be? There's been plenty off ramps if you were a Zionist before, just like people like Tucker and Candace Owens and other people like that took, and then they were once really pro-Israel, and you kind of see Megyn Kelly hedging a little bit, but she still claims she's a Zionist.
Oh yeah.
So wouldn't it be better for them to just come right out and say that we don't support the war in Israel? So why would, like, if that was their goal, to get people to come out against Israel, why wouldn't they just shift their positions instead of?
Yeah.
Because it seems like a lot of work. It seems like a lot of work to do what they're doing, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah. No, it's definitely hard to come to these conclusions and figure out what they're trying to do because it was a horribly put on show. I mean, I just watched the clips of it, but you're right. I mean, it's losing power. I don't know what their plans were, but I know you got me on that one. I don't know.
Well, I think that's the thing, and I've started to come to this conclusion a while ago is that we have agents out there for sure. There's definitely feds in 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 the podcast crew and all kinds of like the news media and all that stuff. Of course we do. But I do think that the best ones do actually believe what they're saying too. You know what I mean? Like that I think that I feel like that I wouldn't because I think that I don't think that they're all that good of actors. You know what I mean? I think that when they take these certain positions, I think you can tell certain people believe what they're saying, right? And then there's those who don't believe what they're saying, and I think that's like kind of when you do see the shift between like the Dan Bonginos and the Cash Patels, when I believe they were saying what they believed when they were talking about the Epstein stuff before they got into the FBI. But when they got in the FBI, then when they try to say there's nothing there, it's like we all know what we're seeing. We know we're being gaslit now because they're not that good at acting, right? So that's why I'm saying like that like the Tucker's his position is reasonable, and it does sound like he believes what he's saying.
Yeah.
And then you have the people. Then you have like the kind of the traditional boomer Zionist view. These people look like that they believe they. I don't know that they look like they believe what they're saying, but they believe in what they support, and they'll say whatever they need to say because this is what, because they can't let any kind of dissent happen on this other side. So I think that that's way like that, the devil is like this puppet master, and he's not necessarily getting people to, he's using their own momentum. You know what I mean? Like it's like a judo throw. Like, you know what I mean? Like if I'm going this way, he'll push you harder because he wants that. But it does seem like that when AmFest was happening, when I remember I saw the clip of Steve Bannon calling Ben Shapiro cancer, I was like, is this AI?
Yeah.
And I was like, because it almost looks too on the nose where like Bannon's coming out in like his brown coat. And I was like, is this real? Am I really watching this for real? But yeah, right. It was just like, it was such a crap show. I just didn't even know what to think about it.
Maybe this, because I've often thought about this, is that I don't think the system really cares who you put your faith in as long as you put your faith into the system. So if you follow a Democrat or a Republican or a Zionist or a Christian nationalist, I don't think they care as long as you think the state and somehow is the solution instead of God. So, I mean, maybe that's what it is. And there's also different levels of programming and different types of personalities. So like a guy like Nick Fuentes, is it going to work on someone that's maybe 45 or 50 years old that was a former Zionist or something like that with a family?
Mm-hmm.
They might look at that guy and be like, hey, who is this, cat boy,
this punk.
pervert, So then you roll out guys like Tucker Carlson. And, with Tucker Carlson, he might believe it. But what I also can't overlook is his ties to intelligence.
Right.
His
I agree
father.
with that.
And what's even crazier, and a lot of people like to look at his father, but I like to look at his biological mother. And she comes from this guy named Henry Miller, the cattle king of California, who actually migrated from Germany in, I believe, the 1800s, changed his name, and then somehow became the largest landowner in America at a period of time in California. And he's one of these ancient bloodlines. I shouldn't say ancient bloodlines, but maybe blue chip bloodlines,
right?
That run this world today. So, I believe he probably believes it. I mean, how can you not believe it? And which is why he can sell you the message. But I think that there's ulterior motives when he's telling you this.
No, that's a good point. That actually makes sense. That as long as there's some kind of a lever in the system that could fix this, well, then it's fine. Because like that's ultimately the problem is like that what we see is what happens in Washington and, not just Washington, in Davos and all the things. The people who are ruling the thing, this is a big, ugly machine. The swamp needed to be drained as, again, Trump tried to campaign on draining the swamp, but the swamp seems like it's too big to drain. Where's all the water going to go? It's way too big. And I remember feeling like this a long time ago. Actually, I want to say when I really got disillusioned with politics was back when Obama won his second term. And I was just like, I don't think one guy is going to matter anyways, because I think this is one big machine. It's going to grind up any good person. And so like the whole thing really needs to come down. And that's kind of like the real message from like most people. And that's probably who Dan Bongino is calling the black pilled people. Because we don't feel like there's any voting our way out of the situation. So I think that
No.
having people who are, regardless of which side you're on, as long as they still kind of advocate, oh, you can totally vote your way out of this problem.
Yeah, right.
We just need to get
And,
our guys in there. And
yeah,
and I think that I think that makes sense.
yeah, you make a good point. It's like our government is so corrupt. The global system is so corrupt. There are trillions and trillions of dollars behind this push, whatever they're trying to do. I think it's a fallacy to your point that we can vote ourselves out of it. But what that belief has led me is to focus on things that I can change, right? And
Yeah.
that's that spiritual battle that's going on. Because think about it, all the time you spend focus on this earthly realm, on their earthly agendas, what are you neglecting? Well, you're neglecting God's agenda for us, right? The spiritual battle that's going on, the great commission of bringing people into the fold. So yeah, to a certain extent, I think politics is just a distraction from that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Speaking of distractions, or do you think this is legitimate as the stuff that was going on in Minnesota with Tim Walz now saying he's not going to run again after Nick Shirley has exposed all the Somalian fraud there?
Nick Shirley.
So what do you think about Nick Shirley? Do you think that he's a Fed too?
He's a Fed. And as soon as this came out, this is initially what I thought of. I was like, all right, so they stole $5 billion. Well,
I think
guess what?
right? 9 billion.
Nine.
Right?
Well, guess what? The Pentagon has stolen $21 trillion over the past 10 years.
Well, they've never passed an audit at the Pentagon. I think,
yeah, right? So to me, this is kind of like a fall guy, right? Like, let's pay attention, especially with Trump being a Republican. It's like, oh, look at these horrible Democrats. They're stealing $5 billion. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the job of the government in both the Republican states and Democrat states. The only difference is whose friends gets to steal the money. So I think that maybe this was like a distraction from what's going on. You look at Nick Shirley, he's heavily platformed. He was, on X, he has something like 800,000 followers.
Well, of course, I would actually really like to see how many followers he had before all this. I know he's not an unknown because he had exposed different kinds of things, like kind of like, I guess he's kind of had that James O'Keefe type stuff where he'd been doing kind of boots on the ground stuff for a while. Because I actually looked at his YouTube channel probably early on, and he had 1 million subs, I think, even before all this stuff even broke. But no,
yeah,
I want to say when I first looked at his profile, or at least the first time I looked, he had 500,000 followers on X. So now, of course, he's got. But I mean, he like those videos that he had went as viral as anything I've seen over the past couple of years.
And hey, that might be an example of this guy's young. He might truly believe in what he's doing, but the system can also use that to achieve their objectives. And I remember when I first heard about this guy and I was scrolling down his X or whatever just to check it out. And like the second thing posted was a video he made about Christians battling the Muslims in America, propping up this kind of holy war. That I think they're trying to usher in, whether it's real or not. I think that's what they're trying to do. And I remember a little off topic, but after the Charlie Kirk assassination, if he even died, I don't know. But you had Alex Jones and InfoWars selling Holy War t-shirts. Real thing.
That's crazy.
And you're like, wait a minute, this is an intelligence operation. So I think, once again, judge a person by the fruits of the Spirit. Right. And I think that the Holy Spirit should convict us that no, a holy war is not needed. Right. Who's ever trying to tell that the war is a spiritual war, and we do that with humility. Right. We explain to these people, we teach these people why we're so happy, why we have the joy, the fruits of the Spirit. Right. And we tell them about our Lord and Savior, Jesus. And I think that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I think that's interesting, especially the Nick Shirley thing, because this is the pattern I've seen with a lot of these people. Of course, Tucker is a great example, too, because he grew up in this family, like with his dad. So you're saying his mom and his dad are connected. But what I've seen from like a Ben Shapiro, a Nick Fuentes, a Charlie Kirk, then Nick Shirley, these guys all started, James O'Keefe. These guys started so young doing that. And I just don't know. It's kind of like the same thing with like it's a little different, but the stuff with the fraud in in Minnesota, it's got these people from Somalia, which I want to say the average IQ in Somalia is like 68. I mean, this is, again, that's might be a hate fact, but I mean, like, that's the truth. And I would say that your average American with a much higher IQ, they wouldn't know where to begin to start an operation like this
Yeah.
to defraud the government and get away with it. So obviously, it makes sense that if you actually do have a high, above room temperature IQ, you realize that somebody is helping them. And the same way, I'm saying the same thing about that. Yes, Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Nick Fuentes, James O'Keefe, and Nick Shirley, they're smart guys. But I don't think it's normal to be able to start from that age to know exactly what you want to do and then make it happen and be as successful as they are. So I think that that's kind of what I'm seeing with, like, what I'm saying, that I believe that these people do believe what they're saying. Now you can kind of tell them, you can catch them when they actually are slipping or they're lying by omission. But I think maybe that's the kind of the idea, is like that they get to these guys young and they are true believers, and then they give them all the funding, they give them all the help, and then now it's like, you're mine now.
Yeah.
You know, I built you, I can tear you down, so you're going to continue on this agenda. So like, they, as long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, and, you know, everything's well with them.
Yeah.
But I think that's the kind of thing with Nick Fuentes. He, as out of all those people, he seems like he's taken the hardest shift, like in the way he talks about things. But because the other guys, like, you know, so I feel like Ben Shapiro is still on the same, he's still saying the same things, right? Charlie Kirk was actually seeming like he was having a conflict of conscience about lots of things he was doing. And maybe that's why he's actually not alive anymore.
Yeah.
Or maybe or he's in Valhalla, whatever. Either way, is that he seemed like a person who maybe they had a harder time controlling, because, like I said, in the Game of Thrones, they killed Ned Stark, right? Because Ned Stark had some real principles, right? So like that he couldn't stick around. So is that what happened to Charlie Kirk? But like a Nick Fuentes, you can just tell by his fruit.
Yeah.
Just give him some
I think there's more
give him some extra
subversive.
shekels and he'll change his mind.
Yeah, I think there's something more subversive with Nick and what he's doing to a generation of young men. And he's promoting this incel type of ideology and stuff like that. But you make a good point how they discover these kids when they're young. Have you ever heard of Norman Pattis, the lawyer?
I've heard the name.
So this is really interesting. And they do identify these kids young. So Candace Owens, not many people know this, that she first came to national spotlight.
Yeah, Candace Owens, how old was she when she first started doing what she's doing?
But even before that, this is the real interesting part of the story. So when she was around, I think, 15 years old, there was a case or a news story that came out where these 4 white young men called her up and they left like these hateful message and possibly death threats on her phone. And this came to national exposure. And, according to Candace, she comes from the ghetto. She doesn't have much money. And the lawyer that was representing her found her, supposedly, this guy named Norman H. Pattis. All right. Now, previously before that, he had actually written an article for a newspaper. I don't know why he would have written this, but he did, talking about how he was interviewed by the CIA. They brought him in. They offered him a job, a starting date, but when he left, they never called back. So you have the CIA adjacent lawyer representing an unknown Candace Owens, which eventually springboarded her into her first position as a Democrat, exposing the right and having that dock system. But what you come to find out is that this guy, Norman Pattis, you know who he also represents currently?
Who's that?
Alex Jones, Nick Fuentes, the Proud Boys, Owen Schroyer. It's almost like he's the preferred lawyer of controlled opposition, especially when they're battling the state or whatever. And here this guy actually, I don't know, found or discovered or saw the story that what happened to Candace Owens. So I think it's really interesting that they identified Candace, what appears to me, identified her when she was very young at 15.
Mm-hmm.
They sent some guy out to kind of help her, and maybe they kind of ushered her into this thing.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me, because like you get them when they're very moldable, and like they're doing it, and it's like you said, if you're not really walking in the spirit, well, it'd be really difficult to walk away with that. And again, it's kind of like a Faustian bargain, though. Like, we don't know what kind of details that they worked out, and it's kind of like that, just like in the music business. No, 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 you're not walking away from this contract you signed.
Yeah.
Like, you're mine now. And so, yeah, I think that makes sense. It was funny. Me and my buddy Aaron were talking about this show. It's on Netflix called Paradise. Have you seen that?
No, it's
It's
about.
a really interesting show where it's about this kind of a post-apocalyptic, like, America or world where they lived in a city under a mountain in Colorado.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You should
With
check
the
it. You
black
should
guy
check
on
it.
it.
Yeah. He's
Okay, I've seen it. I've seen it.
Okay, so the one part was interesting is that the guy who plays the president in that is, he really he never wanted to be president, but his dad is with a kind of like a robber baron type, old oil money. And when he comes to his dad and he says, I want to be a teacher. And he's like, no. He's like, you can either be a senator. He's like, you can either run for the Senate as a Democrat, or you can run as he's like, you're going to hold office in Kentucky. You can either run as a Democrat as senator, or you can be a Republican governor. And I just think it's funny because it's kind of like, to whoever we're talking about, as far as Candace Owens can start off as a Democrat and then she can become a Republican, because it's like they really don't. That's really not the most important part about all this stuff, right? Because they need both sides, right? So like they have to have both sides. So it's kind of like that. They'll say, okay, even these people, I think that they're the handlers. Probably the good ones are the people don't know they're being handled, right? Like, obviously they don't know. So they would say, oh yeah, this is really good. We can use this. We'll change this about you. And then, so it's fine. So they still think that they actually have autonomy over what they're saying. And then I think, but yeah, certain people probably, maybe, yeah, they get really conflicted about, are we actually thinking for ourselves here?
Yeah, I think there's also many levels of controlled opposition. And a lot of these people might not even realize that they are.
Yeah.
Especially when you understand how the algorithm works and how they can promote certain types of things and then censor other things.
Yes.
So they literally can use your opinion to promote their agenda, whether you're bought and paid for or not. And then you have the reposters, right? That kind of just mimic the talking points of what I believe the ones that are actually connected to intelligence, right? So I think that, someone like Candace Owens is connected to some form of intelligence or some bloodline. And then you have all the ones below her, which are kind of like the minions that just repost all the stuff that she's putting. And I believe this fully. Once you promote the Psy-Op, you become the Psy-Op. I don't really believe that, it's about the message, not the messenger. Because if you understand how intelligence operations work, it's all about the messenger to a certain extent.
No, that makes sense. Actually, that makes sense even to like a macro sense, because we're picking out like the most influential podcasters like in the world, really, the people we're mentioning right now. Now, when it comes down to like micro influencers and probably people like ourselves, where like we don't even necessarily know that we're being molded, even though we could be, because, hey, I make a video about this and this video goes viral, and I make another video like that, it goes viral, and then I go talk about something I actually want to talk about. Wait a minute, but I didn't get any views on that video. And then then you try a few more videos and you're like, well, maybe I should try to talk about that other thing again. Oh, wow, another success. And then so they're shaping your message without you even realizing that that's what they're doing. Because I've often wondered about that, because, you've seen my stuff, like especially on social media. Every now and then I dip my toe into politics, but the most part I talk about kind of kooky old stuff. And, and I'm not going to whine that I do fairly well as far as, but then I see, and I censor a lot of the things that I say, like self-censor, because I'm like, I can't say that, because I know that that's a really, like, because I grew up on TikTok where they'll ban you for saying that. So like, I already know that I kind of don't say things. And then I see some people that I follow say 10 times worse things than I'd ever say, that I've often thought that I would be banned for that. But their popularity is growing and growing and growing. And I'm like, so we often wonder amongst ourselves, how is that person succeeding and not getting banned? Because I think lots of people, actually, I don't think it's really that hard to go viral if you could say anything you want to,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But most of us, when we've tried to do that, we've felt the boot of the technocrats say, no, 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 you're not saying that. Not if you say that one more time, you think that all those followers you got, be a shame if you lost them all today.
Yeah. I'm with you, and I often wonder if the videos I put out sometimes contribute to that problem in, my chase to get the video out there to people, right? Because to your point, there's some topics that I talk about that I guess people love, but the reach is so much greater than my other videos. And then when I actually talk about a subject that I think is more important, specifically things in the Bible,
Right.
make it Jesus oriented. And listen, all of my followers, I think the majority of them are all believers, so they would want this type of information. But you'll see, and if you look at like the data behind it, especially on Instagram, it shows like how many views you had or whatever.
Yeah, sure, yes.
And in the first hour, it will be normal, and then all of a sudden, it will just go and go all the way across. So there's that constant battle in me. How much am I capitulating to the algorithm to get my message out there? Am I actually contributing? Is what I'm saying contributing to their agenda, and that's why they're sending it out there, or what? Yeah, it's tough to figure that stuff out.
No, 100%. I know I've had to have that battle from the very beginning where I knew if I mentioned Jesus early on in the video, I saw like that it wasn't like that my audience wasn't paying attention. It's like they never saw it. Like it just never got out to them. So I knew like some of these reels I would make, they were DOA. They were just dead on arrival. As soon as I released it, and I had to have that kind of internal conflict. So maybe should I even post this stuff? It's just not even worth it. But then I thought, well, if I'm posting it for God, if I really feel led to post this, well, I should post this regardless how many views it gets. But that does not mean, so that doesn't mean though that I wouldn't necessarily try not to post. I would not post those videos, but I would still probably post other videos that I know will do well. I mean, that's just human nature. It's like that if you're doing this, especially if you're doing like this for me for like a living, I'm not in the business of posting reels that no one's going to see.
Yeah.
Right. So like if I'm going to make a reel, ultimately I think that I have a kind of strategy where I try to post clips from the podcast because I want people to go listen to the whole podcast. I mean, of course, that's obviously what I would want to do. But then just obviously sometimes you just have to have a take, and like what you're talking about and all the things we were discussing today, being there early is important. And I think that's often why so many things on social media get so distorted and there's so many errors, is because if it's a certain topic, if you're first, well, then that's a winner. So it's about getting there first, and it's not necessarily about being the most accurate and having the most nuance. It's about having the quickest, hottest take immediately. And that's what the algorithm rewards, which you shouldn't.
Oh, they want you to talk about things that just happened.
Yes.
Right. So like, let's say you talk about, Steve Bannon calling out Benji Shapiro. If you do that the following day, the algorithm will love it and it will push it all over the place. Now, if you wait 2 weeks and talk about the same subject, it's not going to push as much. So I think, the algorithm wants you to promote whatever agenda they do.
Yeah, that's good. Well, anyways, we should probably wrap it up here on that note. So
Yes.
What do you want to leave people with though? I mean, as we've talked about these things and kind of like that, what's your opinion about the idea that this could be theater and this could obviously be orchestrated, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know that we should ignore it either. Right. Like, so how do you navigate that?
Well, I think we need to pay attention to it. So we kind of understand what the enemy is throwing at us, right? I don't think we can stick our head in the sand. And when you realize what's going on, at least for me, it only strengthened my relationship with God. It only strengthened my relationship with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, because I realized it was all false. So, I mean, that's what I kind of make out of the situation. But I guess what I really want to end it with is actually a passage from Isaiah 6. It's called Isaiah's Commission from the Lord. And I heard a voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here I am, send me." Now, the Hebrew word for "here I am" is actually Hanene. And Hanene is not just a physical presence, but it's a profound state of total readiness, availability, willingness to serve or act, often in response to a divine calling or significant moments. So, all that to say, and God forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't think God cares about our earthly agendas. I don't think God cares about our hyphenated Christianity or the man-made traditions that we apply to our relationship with God and Jesus. I think what God really cares about is when he asks us to go on a great commission, that we answer with the same zeal that the prophets answered with, whether it was Isaiah, Moses. They all said, "Hanene, here I am, Lord. Do with me what you will. I will carry out your commission for me." And I think we all have that commission. It's called the Great Commission, which is to go out and baptize the nations in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach them everything that Jesus taught us. So pay attention to what's going on in the world. You're going to need to use it in your Great Commission. And it's one of my biggest tools. I can point to what's going on in the world. I can then pull that to the Bible and what we're seeing. But ultimately, I think we should focus on that.
Amen.
I don't know if that answered what you said.
No, I think that's actually really good, because I think that, yeah, we're supposed to be, well, Jesus was sending his apostles out amongst the wolves, so we have to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So I don't necessarily think that being unaware is a helpful thing.
No.
It's look, but don't get too invested in it, but like kind of like look at it from more like what it is. It's like when I watch a movie now, I'm not invested like I was before, but I'm like looking at it with like a critical eye of like, what is it really saying? So like, I think that ultimately that's right. And I think that what we do with the information we have is the most important thing. So like that your why is correct, because we might not be right about everything, but as long as our why is correct, ultimately that's where Christ and the Father wants us to be disciples of the kingdom. We want to be making disciples of people. And I think that being aware and being able to relate to people about things that is water cooler talk. So what I mean? I think that like if you're in an office setting, like the fact that you are informed about certain things, I think that's actually a good thing. You can carry on conversation. You can lead it back to Christ. I think that's where God wants us to be.
100%.
Well, anyways, Ben, appreciate you. Why don't you tell the people where they can find you at?
All right, you can find me at End of the World News on Instagram. I recently, because you suggested it and I always thought about it, I recently started a YouTube channel. It's End of the World's with an S News. End of the World News was not available. I'm also on BitChute, and sometimes on X. I try to stay off of that because that just brings the worst out of me.
Yeah, I get it.
That's what that David, I should say David Savi, but that's what I read through all that stuff. I'm like, comment, and the Holy Spirit or God's just looking like, please don't comment. Don't
Do I
say
feel
what
any
you're about
better
to say.
after I've corrected 10 people?
Yeah, but that's where you can find me. Most of my work is on Instagram. That's my biggest following. That's where I post all my 3-minute videos, and I got my podcast weekly.
All right, awesome. And as I said, this is going to be a 2-parter, so we're going to clip it right here, stop, and then we're going to start again soon.
Talking high mineral sea salts today and why they are a heart-healthy choice for you. The higher the minerals in your sea salt, the lower the sodium and chloride, which is therefore going to make your salt a heart-healthy salt. It's also going to ensure that you get better effects on things like energy production, cholesterol numbers, all these different types of things that people struggle with are mineral imbalance. Just like any machine in the world, we need the right ratios to run it. So we don't just need to take good things, we need to make sure it has the right balance of those things. And if you look at other salts like Redmond and Celtic and other ones that people are using, mostly kosher, Morton's and stuff, they don't have the mineral balance that we do in ours. Theirs is going to be almost non-existent in potassium, and although Celtic has pretty decent numbers on magnesium, it doesn't have the right ratios that we're looking for, and a lot of them have higher calcium, which shuts down the absorption of magnesium if it gets too high. So when we're talking heart healthy and when we're talking the best for your body, we're talking a high mineral sea salt. You can check it out on modernrootslife.com.
And welcome to End of the World News. I'm your host, Ben, and I'd like to introduce a special guest we have this week, JT Follows JC. Thank you for coming on the show. And if you want to start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Well, I appreciate it, Ben. Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so I go by JT Follows JC on all my social media, but you can just call me JT. That's my initials, obviously JC. Well, if you don't know, it's Jesus Christ. And yeah, I'm on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X, Spotify, Apple, pretty much everywhere you can consume content. You can look up JT Follows JC and you can find me over there.
Awesome, awesome. So today I actually wanted to dive into a little bit of the little season stuff and the meltology and all these, monoliths that we find out the world. I think that's how you initially got your started, right? With the ancient monoliths that you saw in like Egypt and stuff like that with your angel documentaries, correct?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, that was sort of early on. I think when I first woke up spiritually, I was really fascinated with the megaliths and giants. So that was just something I was really interested in. I think growing up as somebody who read comic books and liked all the Marvel movies and all that kind of stuff, superhero stuff, when I discovered Genesis 6, I was really fascinated with that. But before that, I did get into just having like a different kind of eschatology, like probably like a lot of people maybe in your audience, that I did believe we were on the precipice of the tribulation. So I did a little bit of everything. I think I haven't changed a lot in that kind of way where my mind is a little ADD, so I have a lot of different interests. But when the things kind of converge, and I'm an active person, so I liked hiking out around, any kind of mountains is cool, and going around big cities and checking out the architecture. So I think that like the stuff with the ancient aliens, that show, and Graham Hancock, and when Rogan was having all those kind of guests on there, like Jimmy, was it Jimmy? Forget his last name, but anyways, he goes by Bright Insight. I was really fascinated with the YouTube channels that would talk about how the megaliths were built or how they weren't built, how we're told they were built. So I was super interested in that stuff because I think that when I could tie that stuff back into the Bible with potentially the book of Enoch, Genesis chapter 6, the story of the Nephilim, the heroes of old, the men of renown, that I think that's a game changer. I think it's really important. It seemed a little fringe at the very beginning, but then like you have shown, all this stuff is connected in some kind of way.
Oh, yeah. All right. So where do you kind of want to get started with? Because I know right now, I saw a couple podcasts with you in the past about this whole meltology and all these infrastructures that appear to be melted that you say comes from, what's it called? The last 7 years already happened. There's a judgment on the earth. You want to kind of get into that with us and these specific sites that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, just before I ever really even came to that conclusion, again, I had a premillennial view, and I was you could call me like a post-trib rapture person. So I felt like that we were going to experience the tribulation, and I thought it was coming. But then I researched many different topics. The topic that kind of came up that I just really didn't know where to place it would be like the old world or Tartaria and the mud flood. But then, and I didn't even know these were necessarily related, was the idea of meltology. And if you guys are not familiar with that term, it's like this idea that supposedly what science tells us are natural rock formations, like picture places like Monument Valley in Utah, the Valley of Fire in Nevada, Goblin Valley, all these really crazy named places, even like the Grand Canyon with all the rock formations that are named after pagan deities and they're called the Temple of Isis, the Temple of Isis, the Temple of Osiris, the Temple of Shiva, all that stuff's in the Grand Canyon. And if you squint, it does kind of look like it could have been a temple. And so when I did discover the little season, it kind of tied a lot of this stuff together. But I guess when you go hiking out west, like without being gaslit, you're looking at something unusual. Like if this was caused by wind and erosion, then there would be a lot more of examples of this stuff everywhere. But they're really kind of regionally placed in these certain spots. And when you can tie it back into the Bible, would be like a place like Cappadocia, Turkey. So we're told about in the book of Revelation that you had 7 letters to 7 different churches that were in Asia, and they're all supposedly in modern day Turkey. Now, what's really interesting about Cappadocia, Turkey, in Peter's epistle, he's writing to, like, I guess his letter goes out to more than one church. And one of the places he mentions is Cappadocia. And have you ever seen the pictures of Cappadocia, Turkey?
Oh, I have not.
Maybe I
Can
should
you pull them up on here? Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be awesome if you could pull up some images that we're talking about and kind of break them down.
yeah, Cappadocia, Turkey. This one was, I remember I had my buddy Vitali on my podcast when I was first asking about the little season. And this place is, I mean, I think it's very significant because it's mentioned in the Bible. And when you look at this place, again, I don't know that this was caused by revelation, but I'm lacking a better explanation because when you see this, like that image right there.
Yeah.
So what we're told is by historians and archaeologists that these were mountains and people carved their dwelling places into them. But that's not what I see. I mean, these places look like they were melted.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, so what are you supposed to do with that, with like kind of a biblical view?
Can I ask you a question about these places? Now,
Yeah.
when do you think these places were actually built? I know you believe that they were melted in the Great Tribulation, but when do you think they were actually built? Because these structures are crazy. I don't know how they built these cities inside these rocks with like hammers and sticks.
So I think that's interesting. Again, going if you just go biblically, what you have is, you know, the empires in the Bible, right? So I believe there was some ancient, very technologically advanced civilizations in the days of Noah, and obviously they were wiped out by the flood. And then you had later the biblical empires. You have, well, I mean, first you have like Nimrod's empire that he establishes that gets broken up at the Tower of Babel, and then later we have these kind of worldwide empires coming back in the times of Nebuchadnezzar with Babylon. So then you have Babylon, Persia, and then Greece, and then Rome. So that's the more difficult part to see, like, because I can imagine that some of these things could have been even older than even Babylon, but maybe they were like repurposed by some of these other ancient empires. So,
What?
but I think it's significant because, you know, Turkey would have been definitely part of the Macedonian Empire with the Greeks. And I think it's really interesting, like places like Afghanistan, that most people don't know that there's like Greek ruins there. Because when you see it on TV, you know, when like they're fight, you know, when we're fighting wars over there, you just have this picture of Afghanistan just being this very backward place. But what did it look like during the times of Rome, during the times of Greece, during the times of Babylon? I mean, it's like Turkey and Afghanistan. These places are like, they're like corridors between Europe and Asia. And they were probably, I mean, they had to be very significant, even as they are today, as far as trade went. So these places would have been very advanced. So I think that a lot of the architecture in Turkey, of course, is Roman, because that's why the book of Revelation was written to them. It was during the times when Rome ruled. And I think that, I think that a lot of the architecture probably was Greco-Roman, probably first built by the Greeks, and then, you know, controlled by the Romans, and they probably built more things there.
Question. Where do you think they got this knowledge to build some of these things if it was in our ancient past? I know we've talked before, and you think that the modern Freemasons are kind of just ripping these people off, right? They're saying, hey, we actually built them when they actually didn't. And you look at, you know, right after the flood with the Tower of Babel, they clearly knew how to build that giant ziggurat or that portal or whatever it was. Do you think that this was like knowledge that they remembered from before the flood?
Well, you know, it's funny. We did have, the first time I had you on my show, we were talking about that and the idea that, you know, like the Pythagorean theorem. So if you guys have not seen that old Donald Duck cartoon from from Walt Disney way back in the day, and they were talking about how you had this sacred geometry, and the symbol of Pythagoras was a pentagram. And of course, I know when everybody says that, and of course, immediately when I first saw that cartoon, I thought that's absolutely satanic. But then it's funny, I was kind of like maybe trying to revisit that, because I believe that God did create the universe with some kind of mathematical kind of equation. He's a god of order. So if you've heard of the Fibonacci pattern, that's this geometric shape that's in everything. Like literally the shapes that you see in nature are repeating, and eventually people learn that, and then they incorporated that into their art and their architecture and their music and everything. So that kind of knowledge, I believe, originally came from God, but then it was likely told to man by the Watchers that came down in the story of the Book of Enoch, and then in Genesis 6 and all that stuff. So it led to an advanced society as far as like the means that they had, the things that they could do. But obviously that doesn't mean it was a godly thing just because they learned something that God did. It was more like that they took knowledge from the Creator and they made fleshly things, and it ultimately turned into corruption. It's kind of like the story of Atlantis, where what Plato told the Greeks about this empire, the Atlanteans, they had this divine spirit that literally came from Poseidon. Poseidon fathers 10 twin sons, and they rule over, they're princes of Atlantis or kings of Atlantis. And then what the story was that eventually this divine spirit dwindled, and then they became very corrupt. And then Zeus and the other gods decided to judge them with a flood. So, I mean, if that was a real place, which I still leave room if it was, it totally fits into the Book of Enoch and Genesis 6. But if it wasn't a true story and it was just an allegory, it certainly lines up exactly what we kind of believe about what the times of the flood would have been. I believe that the first Nephilim were likely akin to something like the Greek gods, right? They were handsome, they were big, they were smart, they had all kinds, they were supermen, right? But then you imagine like when God kind of put a stop to that, then they're trying to keep this bloodline going, but they can't really, there's not more new Nephilim for them to kind of breed with. So they're interbreeding, and then they're getting very corrupt, cannibalistic, and then eventually, yeah, they need judgment. So I think that what a lot of people believe is that some of this knowledge from the pre-flood times was stored up in places maybe like Egypt, and that's where you get like the mythologies about Thoth, maybe Hermes, Mercury, these kind of guys who told men about this time before. And that's why it's interesting that the story from Plato about Atlantis came from another Greek named Herodotus, who got it from this other Greek named Solon. And Solon got the story from the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians believed they were descendants from the Atlanteans. And I want to say even the people from Babylon claim to be related to the Atlanteans. Now, I think that's really interesting. So I think that whatever they did before the flood, it seemed to me, and this is just a theory, that they were able to manipulate stone in all kinds of ways that the people after the flood could not. Because that's why, like like you go to Baalbek, Turkey. I think that's a great example because you see like these giant stones at the base of this temple that was to Jupiter. But you can clearly see like a difference of the construction style. They went from huge stones, like literally they call them the trilithon stones because they weigh like over 1 million pounds each in this foundation of this temple. But then you can see the temple of Jupiter was built atop of that. And that was not built by the people who placed the foundation stones there. So that there was knowledge that was kept, but their technology must not have been as advanced. So they were lacking something.
So what you're saying is that the base of this temple was built before the flood when these gods came down, or fallen gods came down here. And what you see on top of it was probably post-flood, and they built on top of it?
Yeah, let me see if I can find you a picture of what I'm talking about.
I know we talked about last time too, just for the audience while you're looking that up. A lot of these ancient bloodlines go all the way back to Atlantis. I know we talked about how the Basque region, their Atlantean mythology within that as well.
Yes. So here's what I'm talking about. So let's see if I can kind of find a picture with somebody in the scale, but you can see these other stones here that obviously are not even necessarily on the ground level, But see, here's your temple to Jupiter on top of that. And here's the stone. They call it the, this is one that was still in the quarry. And it's bigger than all the other ones. And it was called the stone of the pregnant woman. And you see how big it is.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
yeah, it's like, how did those guys move that with pullers and levies?
Well, look at that. See, so you can see like the different construction style of what I'm talking about, like up here with much smaller stones. But then you see these base stones here are absolutely ridiculous.
Now, would you say that's similar to like the pyramids in Egypt, how you have the three main ones that look like they were built geometrically perfect, and then all the other ones look like they're kind of crappy?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that actually makes sense, because what we're told by historians and Egyptologists is that there's the step pyramid. Maybe I'll find a picture of that. You see the so they call this one the step pyramid. They call this one the oldest one, but I don't think that it's the oldest one. I think that the ones on the Giza Plateau are older. But you can kind of see this kind of different construction method where this actually makes sense to people like in more modern times, because you can see all like the smaller bricks that make up this pyramid. And you compare that to like something in Giza. Now, again, that actually doesn't give it the justice for some of these ones because you can't see the people on them. But like these stones, the average size of the stone in this, I want to say there's 2 million stones that make up this pyramid, and their average weight is 2.5 tons.
Damn.
Right,
How'd
exactly.
they move those things?
Yeah, well, see, there you go. You could clearly see in that step pyramid that there's smaller bricks. And here's what you have when you look at all the great pyramids look like this. So you see how big the stones are compared to people. So it makes sense to me when you actually do like think about the way that we're told biblically how some of the stuff was built. We're told that the Israelites built things, they built bricks, and the Pharaoh gave them straw to make their bricks. But when you look at the Giza Plateau and you look at the pyramids there, they're made of giant limestone blocks. So that's really not what the Israelites were making. Those things had to be quarried and they had to be carved. And I think that's really interesting, the way that the pyramids are like perfectly level, but then all the stones are different sizes. I mean, as a person in construction, or I used to be, that is mind-blowing with the amount of accuracy with not level materials. You know, making something that's level without using uneven stones. So yeah, I think there's clearly, even based on the mainstream take, there's a lot of things under Egypt. And so we wonder if the idea that some of this lost knowledge from the antediluvian times was stored under Egyptian, pyramids and all of the Giza Plateau, because I think a lot of people believe, especially in old world research or anything else, that a lot of the most mysterious things are the things that are under the earth, not that are above the earth.
Yeah, and I've even seen videos. There's like things underneath Israel that almost looks like Israel was built on top of.
Oh yeah, 100%.
From our ancient past.
Well, it's interesting. If I'm kind of like a Tolkien nerd, I like the Lord of the Rings stuff. You ever watched any of those movies?
Yeah, oh yeah, I love the Lord of the Rings.
So the dwarves, right? So that they were really good at mining into the earth and they were looking for jewels. Now, this might sound anti-Semitic, but it's not. This is what Tolkien did. That the dwarves resemble certain types of people.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a coincidence, because in the first Lord of the Rings movie, that Gimli, the one dwarf, wants them to take this different path through the mines of Moria. Well, where the Temple Mount was Mount Moriah. And so like the Templars' lore was that they were going under the Temple Mount and they were finding all kinds of relics and scrolls under there. So they were looking for this knowledge. And of course, it's kind of funny to think in the Lord of the Rings mythos that Gandalf says that they got greedy and they dug too deep, and then all these evil spirits were awakened.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So I think that Tolkien is definitely revealing some truth in the fiction that he wrote.
Yeah, awesome. Now, if you don't mind, if I want to steer this conversation a little bit and let you cook with some gas, because as my audience knows, I am a premillennialist, but I'm also open to the idea that we live in Satan's short season, his season of deception. I mean, eschatology can be very esoteric, but you definitely came to this conclusion. You want to talk about how you came to this conclusion, and then within scripture, and then some of the real life examples that led you to believe that this is true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of a culmination of a lot of the things that I learned was because I did like looking into the ancient architecture, the Roman structures, and going even further back to the pyramids. I think that you can make a pretty good biblical case, even as a premillennialist, to so how did they build the pyramids? Well, we really don't know because the flood wiped out all the kind of the peoples and the knowledge of these things. But I think when you get into the Roman structures and a lot of the other mysterious things around the world that we believe biblically are not as old as they could not be from the times of Noah because, again, as I mentioned, you have Nimrod after the flood, and then we have these four great empires that the Bible describes in the book of Daniel. And then the Bible concludes with the last emperor or the last empire, which is the Roman Empire, when the book of Revelation is written. So when I started to research some of that stuff, I just started to notice that some of the history is really foggy or unclear or just completely just omitted. And so that led me, as a kind of a person who's a little more of conspiratorial, a truther, I said, that's a problem for me. Why don't we know everything that the Romans did? Because you can kind of rationalize why you don't know how the Egyptians did things because we don't have all the scrolls of all the things they did. Well, why don't we have all the scrolls from the things the Romans did? Because we do have the Bible, right?
Yeah.
So the Bible came before all that stuff, or a lot of it. So why do we have the Bible, but we don't have all the writings from the historians that can chronicle the years, every year, that the Romans did everything? Like, how did the recipe for Roman concrete ever get lost? There's a good rabbit hole to go down if you're interested in this topic, is go look at some of the technology the Romans had that we don't know how they did things. And there's lots of things like that. The Romans were very advanced. And I think that the Babylonians were very advanced, the Chaldeans. Because if you think about even the way that the Bible describes this statue that is in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the head is gold. So it's kind of like the first empire is almost portrayed as like the greatest one. And then you have the torso that is silver, which represents the Persian Empire. Then you have the bronze that represents Greece. And then you have the iron and the clay that represents the Roman Empire. So I think that to me was maybe a clue that the history we're taught is not necessarily fact. And then so when I go biblically and I start to revisit some of these scriptures, especially like if you just go straight with the book of Revelation, I always point this out that I originally was taught to be a dispensationalist, that there was this 2,000-year gap in the prophecy timeline. The 70 week of Daniel kind of ends like in the dispensational view with we're in the times of Christ. And so that gets us through the 69th week. And so we're waiting for the 70th week. But if you try to find a 2,000-year gap in that prophecy, you won't find it. It's just not in there. So what dispensationals will say that these 7 churches that are all the letters are written to, they represent church ages. But I'm like, but let scripture interpret scripture. You won't read that into the book of Revelation. I mean, these were actual places, there were actual peoples that lived in what we're told is modern day Turkey. And then so historically, when you do this kind of research, you find out that those churches don't exist anymore. Like they were archaeological sites 100 years ago. And so if you go see pictures of them today, a lot of times you can see where they dug stuff up and they've restacked things to kind of put them in some kind of order for some kind of tourist to go visit it. But the historical pictures of those churches are absolutely mind-blowing. Actually, I should probably show a couple of these. Let me see if I can.
Oh yeah, bring them up.
Yeah, let me see. I saved a bunch of them on my Pinterest. I used to save all these pictures over here, so when we made videos, I had visuals to show people. I think actually, this again, I think this is in Turkey, but this is not necessarily from one of the churches, but I think this is an interesting picture. You can kind of see like a melted place, and it's this opening is obviously covered by tons of sediment. Let me click over to here. I've saved a lot of stuff over the years.
I need to do that because I always have to go back and look them up, and then you never know if they're going to be there when you go and look them up again. Okay,
so this right here is, I want to say this was in Smyrna, which was one of the 7 churches. Okay. And just look at that picture. Just look at that guy in this column, this Roman column that was completely buried under the ground.
Yeah.
So to me, I guess when I see that kind of stuff, I have to question. So like these are not all necessarily the churches, but like here's in Egypt, like this is what this place looked like before. And so I started to draw the conclusion that the mud flood might have been when Revelation was happening. I think here's another place in Turkey right here. Or no, this is Constantinople.
So you think the
but
mud
also
flood
in Turkey.
So you think the mud flood happened during Revelations around 70 AD?
Well, I think we can get into like the timeline stuff, and it's a little bit harder to kind of really wrap your mind around if that was necessarily all. Here's another picture of Turkey, Smyrna.
Oh, wow.
Oh, actually, the saying is Sardis, but Sardis is another site in the Book of Revelation, another church.
Yeah, it's clearly submerged in dirt right there.
Right. So that was a thing that really kind of tripped me up, was that I had heard this, and I think a lot of people had, if you're paying attention, you've probably seen articles about this, where in Europe that they are, I don't know, some guy's farming in his field and he finds a Roman mosaic under his crops, or they're digging something for a new, I don't know, they're putting a foundation in place and they find a Roman bathhouse buried under the ground. And I don't know that they've ever taught anybody that Rome got buried like that. So if you do just read the scriptures, and if let's just focus on Revelation again, that Jesus is telling John that he's going to see a vision, and he wants John to write this vision out to these 7 churches. And Jesus says, I'm going to show you the things that are and the things that will take place after this. So there's so many verses that talk about in the book of Revelation that Jesus says, I'm coming quickly. All these things are at hand. Even I want to give a credit to the Unraveling podcast. They just released a reel the other day, and I thought it was a great point. In the book of Ezekiel, the Israelites are hearing about all these prophecies that are coming, and they're like, but it's far off, so they're not worried about it. And so when God is telling Ezekiel to tell them, don't tell them that anymore. Tell them this stuff is at hand now. This thing's about to happen. So that's what the book of Revelation is saying. Like, so when you read in the Gospels, all these things are at hand. The time is near. You know, when Jesus says on the Olivet Discourse that before this generation passes away, all these things will take place. Now a lot of people who are premillennial will say, well, he didn't mean their generation. He meant the generation that would see these things. But the chapter starts with the apostles asking about the temple, and Jesus saying that it's going to be destroyed. Not one stone is going to be left upon another. So then they say, when will these things be? What will the signs be? And you're coming in the end of the age, or the end of the world. And so when you kind of put the context around all the things that are led to be believed as imminent, as the apostles also write in their epistles, that John writes in 1 John that it's the last hour. Many antichrists have come, and one's coming, so we know it's the last hour. Peter says the end of all things is at hand. Paul tells in 1 Corinthians 7 that if you're married or unmarried, do not change the state you're in, because basically the world as we know it's about to end. It says in Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes the book of Joel, saying after Pentecost that this prophecy is fulfilled. In Joel saying, in the last days, old men will dream dreams, young men will see vision. There'll be an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. So he's saying like that this is happening right now. The book of Hebrews, it starts out by saying, in times past, God spoke to his people through his prophets, but in these last days, he spoke to us through his son. It also mentions in the book of Hebrews that Jesus came to be sacrificed at the end of the world, at the end of the age. So they are indicating this is all taking place. Another verse that is funny, my wife just brought this up today. She's reading back through the Gospels. She read Matthew. In Matthew 10:23, it says, when you're persecuted in one town, don't wait, leave to go to the next one. You will have not gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. You know, Matthew 16:28 says that truly I tell you, some standing here won't taste death until they see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. And some people say that's the transfiguration, but it's like shown it's 6 days later that this happens. Nobody's dead. And also before that verse, he says that he's coming with his angels to reward each man for what he's done. So I think there's plenty of verses that indicate that all these things are about to take place. And then so when you kind of tie that in with the Meltology and the mud flood and the mysterious architecture that really does not make sense in our past, all those pieces together had made me conclude that maybe this is the best explanation for it.
Can I ask you a question? How do you think that Satan in his time of deception has been able to cover up everything about our ancient past? Whether that's writings about the Millennial Kingdom, did they realize they were in the Millennial Kingdom? How do you think it all got covered up?
Well, you know, I want to say in the 6th century, Augustine of Hippo, he started this view of what they call amillennialism, is that they believe that they were in the millennial reign, but the way it's interpreted is that it was a more of a spiritual millennial reign. And so Protestants today say, oh, well, here's what the millennial reign is supposed to look like. So, but I guess the truth be told is that Protestant view is not the majority of view around all of church history. Now, if you point back to the early church fathers, they believed that they were about to experience the tribulation. They all believed it was imminent. Now, the question is, when did these church fathers actually write these documents? Well, we really don't know. I mean, they say that they know, but I think it's interesting just from this perspective is that we now have AD chronology, which we're told is Anno Domini means the year of our Lord. So they changed our timeline at some point. So when you say these things happened in the 1st century or 70 AD, these are based on us going back and trying to date things based on our current calendar, not the calendar they had then. So I believe a lot of these events that are told to be over 1,000 years or maybe even more, I believe a lot of these events were actually really closer to the times of Jesus, whenever that was. So when we say 70 AD, and I will use 70 AD just because people know what I'm talking about. And if the audience doesn't know what I'm talking about, so in between 66 AD and 70 AD, the Romans surrounded Jerusalem. This was the Jewish-Roman War, and it was a 3.5-year war where it ended with the city of Jerusalem and the temple being destroyed and burned to the ground. So I think what's really significant about that is it mentions in Revelation chapter 11 that the nations are going to have 42 months to trample on the holy city. That's exactly how long it was for the Jewish-Roman War to be.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I would say that from my perspective, I was like, when I first learned that, I was really blown away. Like that, I mean, how could that be a coincidence? And of course, just think about the prophecy in the book of Daniel. It says that basically in this last week, that the temple sacrifices are going to be cut off. So when I had that premillennial view, I was still kind of struggling with that idea. I'm like, wait a minute. So we're waiting on a temple, right, to be built so they can start sacrificing again, only for them to stop sacrificing. I was like, but they really haven't been sacrificing there for what we're told is 2,000 years. And the 70-week prophecy is kicked off by the decree to rebuild the second temple. And that's the temple that Jesus is pointing to, saying, see that temple right there? Not one stone will be left upon another. So if the Olivet Discourse is about the end times, it starts with the conversation about the destruction of the temple, the one that's no longer there. That Josephus wrote that when the Romans burned down the temple, gold melted down into the foundations of the temple. And the Romans pried up the foundation to get the gold out, fulfilling what Jesus said to the word, that not one stone was left upon another. So now when they have this wicked ritual or whatever they're doing over in Jerusalem where they're kissing this wall, and we're told this Wailing Wall was a part of the original temple or the second temple, it's not. It was part of some Roman fortress from like the times of Hadrian. So what are they actually doing there? I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I still don't have a great answer for that, but it doesn't seem like it's any kind of godly thing. And it almost makes me think that by acknowledging or by taking part in this, you're kind of denying what Jesus said. If he said not one stone was going to be left upon another, you saying this part of this old temple, you're kind of denying what Jesus said. But to go back to your question about, so how could the devil have hidden this stuff? I think part of it was the fact that it was just hidden. Like the devil didn't have to hide a lot of this, because if you look at the evidence of this destruction that was worldwide, I think that this is why we don't know more about our past. Now, the real question is, how many people do know about what happened then? Is this the kind of information that could be under the Vatican in the 53 miles worth of bookshelves and the hidden knowledge there? Possibly. So some of it could definitely be hidden, but I think that a lot of people have really just tried to piece parts of our history back together, and it's a mess. And I think so even people working within the system who actually believe in what they're doing and don't believe that they're being dishonest, they're just doing their best to kind of stay in this chronology that we've been given.
Gotcha. Interesting. Now, I have a question, because I'm really interested about this stuff. And like I said, I'm open to everything. At least from what I understand, if you're a premillennialist, we think that, Jesus is going to come down and rule from Jerusalem in this physical reality of this earth for 1,000 years. What is your take on that? Do you think that he was ruling from this earthly plane, or was he ruling from a spiritual plane, similar to the way Satan is today?
I think that's the way it is. I think that I had the traditional kind of premillennial view that he was going to be setting up his throne in modern day Jerusalem, and everything was going to be run through there. But when you actually think about what Jesus says to the Pharisees, and I want to say it's Luke chapter 17, the Pharisees question about the kingdom, when is it coming? And Jesus tells them, the kingdom is not coming in ways that can be observed. So how do you really square that verse with a kingdom that is going to come in ways that can be observed? Like the one that everyone's talking about. Pilate asked him if he's a king, and he says, my kingdom is not of this world. In the book of John, when Jesus says, what truly I tell you, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, there's many mansions. If it wasn't so, I would not told you. And when I come back and I return, I'm going to bring you to where I am, and you'll always be there. So I believe that the kingdom was ruled in heavenly Jerusalem. What Jesus was talking about, the kingdom's not coming in ways that can be observed. He's talking about that Jesus is going to send this promise of the Father, this Holy Spirit that he was filled with, and then we would be connected to this spiritual kingdom. Now, people would say, oh, well, so it's not literal. It's like, well, spiritual things are literal. They're not things you can see, but we're seeking a kingdom that cannot be seen. And I think if you live in faith, how can you really justify a view that says everything's going to be physical during this millennial reign? Because faith is the thing, the hope in the things that are not seen, not the things you can see and touch and taste. It's the things you can't. So when Jesus is resurrected, he's kind of got this metaphysical body, so he is spirit, but he's also flesh. He can touch, he can taste, he can eat. People can put their hands in his wounds. So he is physical. I think that that's probably what New Jerusalem's like, where it is a physical place, but it's not necessarily, it's like you can't really wrap your mind around it. Could we actually see it physically? Because Jesus, despite being able to do all those things, he could pass through walls. He could go into rooms without opening the doors. So what if the kingdom is something like that?
Yeah. So I have a question. What do you think it was like on this earth under the millennial kingdom when Jesus is ruling from the spiritual realm and we don't have the interference of the demonic realm or the satanic realm? How do you think that manifested in its architecture? What buildings did they build, or just how they lived life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I have started to believe, and it's funny, I just made a reel about this today, that I believe a lot of the Greco-Roman architecture from the times of Rome are still here. And we're told that they were built by other people in more modern times. But I think that some of that architecture could have been advanced things that the Romans did. And that's why there's Greco-Roman things on every continent. Now, because that architectural style is very distinct. Everybody knows it when they see it. Got big columns, big domes, big rotundas, and all the kind of trappings of like the Roman, architecture. But then you have a different kind of style with like the Gothic cathedrals, which that's clearly a different style altogether. But you still have like these churches that were built in these kind of pagan basilica styles, where they could have been repurposed old architecture from the Romans, or they could have just still built the same way that the Romans did, because biblically the Romans became Christians. Even historically, that we're told that in the times of Constantine, he outlawed paganism, and then the whole empire became Christian. And then so the Roman Empire morphed into something called the Byzantine Empire. That was a Christian empire that lasted 1,000 years, from 300 AD to 1300 AD. Now, again, I don't necessarily believe that all the years are accurate, but I have often thought that if there is a good king ruling from his throne, and his saints are, obviously part of this reign, what would happen to the things on the earth? Because I think it's like if God changes you, there's physical results of that, but that you get changed from the inside out. So, but the out gets changed after the inside gets changed. So if the devil during the 1,000 years is put in a pit and he's no longer able to deceive the nations, well, maybe if we didn't have that old serpent pulling the strings of the world leaders, maybe men have the best interests of other men at mind. Because I really do think that we don't give enough credit to, I guess, ourselves and what men could actually do if unhindered by spiritual warfare. If we were all of one mind to help out your common man, maybe that is why we could create buildings that look way excessive to the times we live in today. So there's also an alternate theory that some of this architecture is like heavenly. It's like literally like there was help from angels or heavenly saints. Now, I'm not sure about that. Obviously, there's no way to prove that. But it is funny I want to say that, was it Michelangelo was tasked with creating, I think, the Basilica in Rome. And when he looked at the Pantheon in Rome, that was supposedly built in the 1st or the 2nd century, he looked at the dome that's the biggest unsupported concrete dome in the whole world. And he said this was not built by the hands of men, but built by angels.
He said that? Wow.
He said that. Even his name, it's funny, me and my buddy Brian, Demon Racers, were talking about on his channel once, that even the name Michelangelo, Michael Angelo,
Oh, wow.
Michael the Angel, I'm starting to wonder that are some of these men who are given credit for some of the greatest works of art and architecture in the world, are those names, are they just stand-ins for like, we really don't know who did this, but it had to be the work of an angel who did some of these things.
That's crazy. I never even thought about that. Mikey Angelo. It almost reminds me of like Superman's real name, Kal-El. You know, like a little. Can I ask you another question? Because I find this stuff fascinating. So I look at church history, and especially when you're talking about Constantine and the birth of Roman Catholicism and everything that was birthed off of that when they divided. To me, it almost looks like they incorporated Mithraism with the story of Jesus. I mean, you have the venerating of the saints. You have them adopting the name of Isis for the Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven. changing the Sabbath. And I don't necessarily have a good view of that stuff, but you might have a different view on that because you believe that this was under the millennial kingdom. How has your view on the early church changed ever since coming to this conclusion?
I guess I want to leave more room for grace for the things that they did and maybe the reasons they got things wrong or we believe they got things wrong. I think that it's easy today to look at Roman Catholicism and say it was always this way, but I don't know that it was always so. And I think that what people probably don't really consider that if during this thousand year reign, it's on earth and it involves people who are not all glorified saints. So there's still the room for error, right? And so when people think about this 1,000 years of peace, well, they're like, well, when was there ever 1,000 years with just total peace on the earth? Well, Jesus says, I leave you with peace. So is it a situation where we're looking for peace like we think, but if you're in Christ, you should already have peace? So it's not necessarily that it's the physical fleshly way that we see everything. It's a combination of things. And so I think that we can attribute a lot of things based on hindsight or even like maybe a lack of understanding of exactly how things all went down and why things got sideways. But I just think that without considering that it's not exactly like we think it would be, there's always room for error when men are involved, right? And like that they might have done some wrong things, but was it intentional or was it just because, again, like you can't look at any church today and say it's perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was only one perfect man. So if Christ is not ruling like people think he was, well, then there's still free will. I mean, because even after the millennial reign, that men are deceived and there's a big battle at the end. So if those are the same men who lived through the 1,000 years, well, then obviously that there was dissent. And I also believe that might be really kind of how the secret societies really kind of solidified their power, that they had to be secret during this time. Because even historically, you see like the Knights Templar were burned at the stake, right? That there was always battles between the church and the Freemasons, right? They would get excommunicated if they found out they were in this secret society. So if things are like they are today, well, that doesn't seem like a view that people would be holding today, right? Like they would not persecute those kind of people. But there was a time where even think about the idea that Christ rules with a rod of iron. That's not the kind of idea that it's all peaceful, right? It's like that there has to be some righteous judgment during this time. And so, yeah, I still think that there's just room for that people are still people.
Yeah.
Regardless if they are during this 1,000 years or after the 1,000 years.
Awesome. And one more thing. So I know what I also find interesting, and I'm trying to make sense of this, and maybe you can help me make sense of this. So when I read Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about Gog and Magog. And then when you read about Satan's short season, it talks about how Satan gathers up his buddies Gog and Magog, I believe, and they wage war against the city of Jerusalem. How do you see all that playing out? Do you think they're talking about the same thing there, and we mistake in Ezekiel 38, 39 as the 7 years of tribulation? Or how do you think those two correlate with each other?
And I think that's what John is drawing on. I think he's drawing on Ezekiel 38 and 39 when he's talking about this battle of Gog and Magog. But what it says in the book of Revelation is like that's after the 1,000 years. So that's not the tribulation. So this time where it's described in Ezekiel 38 is that things are rebuilt and it is a peaceful time where this battle takes place. Now, I've tried to kind of wrestle with this idea because if I believe the millennial reign was more of a spiritual rule than it was a physical rule, well, how do you have a physical battle at the end of that? And you said Jerusalem, but it doesn't actually say Jerusalem. It says the camp of the saints and the beloved city.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, it's almost like even drawing like two kind of separate, like almost like a dividing line between these two things. There's a camp of the saints and then there's this beloved city. So this final battle could be both a physical battle and a spiritual battle at the same time. And I think that's what the book of Revelation is actually showing. And people are not quite grasping it because John is getting different views from the earth. He's getting it from heaven. He's getting different kind of vantage points from seeing all. He's seeing in the spirit. So when you think about the craziest imagery in the book of Revelation, I think that those could be spiritual concepts that we're actually not seeing. It's kind of like when there's a physical war happening on the earth, there's a spiritual battle happening at the exact same time. But we don't witness all the other things. Every now and then there might be some kind of miraculous thing that happens, but men are really focused on other men and the things that are happening from this kind of plane that we are seeing everything. There's kind of I always think about it like this might sound a little new agey, but it's like the idea that we are at this certain frequency, we're on this one vibrational level of the fleshly things. And so the spiritual things, you can even be like a low vibe, kind of think about like the upside down in Stranger Things. This is like a low vibrational thing where everything's decayed and here's the demonic entities. And then there's a higher frequency where the spiritual, like the good things are at, the angels. So I've started to wonder that where our views, the premillennial view and the kind of the postmillennial view, could look very similar, because what if the camp of the saints is literally just the Christians who live on the earth? So this battle is coming for us. So to us, for all intents and purposes, it's really not different, because we are going to experience some kind of a tribulation here. Now, the only difference is, where is this at on the biblical timeline? So that there's an attack on New Jerusalem at the same time with the spiritual entities trying to lay siege to God's kingdom. That's the metaphysical place. And on the physical place that we live, there's also a battle happening at the exact same time. Where
Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I hate throwing dates out there, but in your opinion, I don't want you to throw dates out there. How far along do you think we're in Satan's short season, and what comes after it? How do you think it all plays out?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just touch on the timeline stuff for 1 second. This is a longer conversation. This could be a whole podcast, but we looked into this German researcher named Gunnar Heinzen. So there's some alternate chronology people like Fomenko. I've never really read his books. He talks about, I think his view is very confusing to me, but he talks about the kind of repeating characters in history, and this is how 1,000 years has been added to our timeline. But Gunnar Heinzen's research was really good, because his was like more of a scientific thing. Fomenko was a mathematician, and that's where he kind of poked holes at our chronology. But Gunnar Heinzen was talking about the strata levels. And so what he was discussing is, like, if you think about the strata, is where kind of like the more modern civilizations are built, obviously at the highest levels, and you dig down lower and you'll find older ancient civilizations under us. Now, when he looked at the strata of, I want to say 30,000 Roman sites, that the Roman strata, where all that stuff was built, that what we're told was built early antiquity, like the first through third century, then mid antiquity, like 4th, 5th, and 6th, and then you get into late antiquity. He was saying that what history tells us is that they built their architecture in Renaissance style. They kept on building it back to a first century Roman architectural style. And that's what's interesting, because the Roman architecture has remained remarkably consistent in the way it looks. So what his conclusion, though, was, based on the strata, that if history was accurate, or the chronology was accurate, what you'd expect to find is you would have these different layers of like the Renaissance and the late Renaissance going back to the first century, that they would have been built upon older things. But he was saying that they're all on the exact same strata line. So he's saying that what his conclusion was, that there was 700 years added to the first 1,000 years. So basically, if for our purposes, it would be like if you move Jesus up into like the 7th century or the 8th century, like the 700s. And so it's kind of interesting to think about the idea that, let's just say we start with Christ was born around 700. Well, in 770, then that's when the temple's destroyed. And so then you add like 1,000 years, all the things that take place after that. What if that leads us to like 1776? and then you have the American Revolution, the founding of the Illuminati, and then after that you have the French Revolution, and then eventually you have like the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And what it's leading to is the conquering of all these ancient monarchies. They were historically Christian monarchies. And so that would put us around approaching 250 years of what we would consider maybe the little season, because that's the thing we've kind of like maybe drawn kind of the symbolism with like the Statue of Liberty, and it resembles this famous painting to Lucifer summering his hordes in hell, and it's got a broken chain around its ankle, and it resembles ancient statues like Helios, Apollo, Mithra, was it Shamash? It's like this sun god worship. And he brought up Superman. I think it's interesting that Superman, his name in Hebrew would have been Kal-El. So El being Elohim, God, and Kal means light. So it's like light god.
Lucifer.
Right. So it's like it kind of all tracks together. It's like that this is this new world order. This Novus Ordo Seclorum was like that this was the age after the age of Christ, where the devil is unbound and now he's out deceiving. And I think that, I think that what we're told biblically is that the millennial reign is 1,000 years. Now, some people would say that in the Greek, it means kind of uncertain infinity. It's this time established by God, but it's really not a literal 1,000 years. Now, I would say just from reading the text as accurately as I can and just taking it as literal as I can, unless I can't, I believe it was 1,000 years. Now, people ask, well, how long is the little season? Because that's what people can't wrap their minds around. It's like, well, it can't be longer than 1,000 years. Well, the truth is, it does not say how long it is. I think it's as long as it takes the devil to deceive the nations and gather this army. And so that's the thing. It's like, how long does that take? It takes as long as it takes. It takes as long as it has a lot to do with us. Yeah. Is if you went from a Christian time where the world is established as this Christian place, how long does it take to erode 1,000 years of Christianity? I mean, it would take some generations. I believe it would take some centuries. So some people have speculated that it could be 250 years. I mean, it certainly seems like we're coming to the head of something. Now, I don't want to manifest anything. I don't want to speak any kind of evil and try to promote an idea of fear. Like this is definitely the end. But it definitely seems like that whatever was kind of established through the modern creation of Israel, the Balfour Declaration, and whatever they're doing with that place, it seems like that plan has to have some kind of, pinnacle, some kind of conclusion that it seems like we're racing toward right now. So I think that a lot of people are on, obviously, the devil's side, and they're all deceived, right? They might know more about our timeline than we do, but I still think that a lot of them still do believe that we are in this premillennial view. But of course, they don't have the same kind of view as you and I do anyways, because they believe that some man in the line of David is going to show up and he's actually going to be a king. Because they're not looking for Christ. They denied him the first time. They still deny him every day. So I think that a lot of those things look like, that this is the typology and this is the stuff that it does seem to be repeating.
Interesting. Now, I have another question because I'm best fascinated in this. How do you think, and I think I've heard you talk about this before, how do you think the alien Psy-Op plays in this short season?
Well, so this is another theory about, so if I gave you an idea that potentially we are the camp of the saints, Holy Spirit-filled Christians are the camp of the saints here. There's still this New Jerusalem it's a heavenly city. Some people believe it's actually on a terrestrial plane here, could be somewhere around the North Pole, Antarctica, someplace that we don't really have access to, which obviously we have access to neither of those places. But obviously it says in Revelation 21 that New Jerusalem descends down at some point. Now, when you look at the dimensions of New Jerusalem, it's like, I want to say it's like 1,200 cubits, or maybe was it, I forgot what the exact measurement was. But anyways, it's 3 dimensions. It almost kind of resembles like a cube or something like that.
Yeah.
And if this descends down, I think it's interesting, like the imagery and like in the movies, like you think about like the movie like Star Trek, you have the Borg, or like that they live in this gigantic cube and all these people have been assimilated into this hive mind. And I think that that could be an inversion where that's what they view Christians to be like, right? They've lost all autonomy. They're just totally, you know what I mean? Like that they really don't have any kind of personhood after this. Because when we identify as Christ, we're like part of this temple, right? Like we're living stones in this temple that is New Jerusalem. So I've wondered, and my buddy Vitali, who the very first podcast we talked about this, because I was asking about like where's Christ at if he came back, and so he was kind of drawing from like the kind of the culture where we're seeing all these movies like was it like Independence Day, where you have these ships descend, they come upon these major cities, and of course eventually they destroy the cities. You have movies like the Marvel franchise with Thanos. I've done a lot of videos talking about how Thanos is an inversion of God or Christ himself, where he shows up and he says, I am. His ship is called the Sanctuary. So if you go back to that very famous Ronald Reagan speech to the United Nations, where he says that if there was an alien threat, we'd put aside our differences and we would all band together for this common good, because you have this existential threat of aliens, right? So what if that is how the devil in the final card, kind of like the Werner von Braun talked about, the kind of like these Psy-Ops that were coming, and like the final one was aliens. So what if that's how it's being distorted, and that's how the nations actually come together? Because that's what they show you in all the movies, is that China and America, suddenly everybody's linking arms and we're saying, we got to fight because humanity is going to be wiped out unless we band together.
Yeah, that's definitely a common belief between you and I. I often thought about that back to Reagan's speech. I always thought, like, what if this whole alien psyop is just a way to deceive us into fighting against God?
Right. Well, I mean, that's like, so they just released, another version of the Fantastic Four, right? And the very first Fantastic Four comic book is like where the original story about the Silver Surfer and Galactus. It's a totally Gnostic gospel where this God character is coming to destroy the earth. He sends his herald, right? He sends like this angel. And if you go listen to the creators of this comic book, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby straight up says that Silver Surfer was a fallen angel. So the Silver Surfer in the comic book betrays Galactus because he ends up having some kind of affinity for humans, and then he tries to protect them. And so then Galactus banishes him to be stuck on Earth. He can't leave anymore. And so, yeah, Stan Lee famously said that they were trying to kind of up the stakes when they were making these comic books. He says, here's an idea. We're going to have the Fantastic Four fight God. So like that is kind of what they're trying to show us, is that all the Avenger movies and things like that, they're always facing this alien threat who's going to try to wipe out the earth. So that's like what we're being shown. And I think that that's exactly what it's the exact kind of inversion that you'd expect, is because if you really think about like the whole idea of the little season, regardless if you agree with me about the details about this, or even if we're in that, it only makes sense to me that the people could be deceived in the little season is because they didn't know that they were in it. And how could the devil trick people to go fight God? Right? Like it's really hard to wrap your mind around. How could he trick people to go fight God? Well, because maybe they don't think it's God.
Yeah.
It's got to be something else, because we know you can't win that battle. The devil knows he can't win that battle. He knows that we're not going to win. So obviously the devil is only out to lie, kill, and steal. So he's trying to lead us to the same place that he's destined to go. So, and how can he do that? He has to make people obviously worried about your own flesh. You got to be worried about, you're going to be led through fear. Like, we have to do this. So regardless of how it all plays out, I mean, that seems to be like the devil's MO, is he can promise you lots of things that are of the flesh, and he can scare you. So we're not supposed to be led by a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. So I think that, yeah, it just makes sense to me that there's a reason why that the thing in our culture is aliens over the last 100 years. Because before, nobody would ever thought that there was beings from other planets. That was not a view. So there would be gods from the heavens, there'd be angels, and then what else are the other things? I mean, God doesn't talk about other things that he created. Of course, there could be room for that, but I don't really believe in all the outer space stuff anyways. And people before didn't either. So I think that kind of deception, maybe the heliocentric model that led into the idea of outer space, that leads into the idea of eventually other worlds that are inhabited by alien races, and we're always shown that they're super advanced. Because they would have to be, because if they could travel light years to get here and we can't travel to get to where they are, well, then clearly by the time they get here, they'll be super beings compared to us.
Awesome. Now, I have another question for you. I think I've asked you this before. So today, when you look at the bloodlines that run this world, they all claim to take their genealogy back to the dragon gods or to these fallen gods. Do you think they really are? Or do you think they're pretending to be and they were wiped out? The true bloodlines were wiped out during the 7 years of tribulation.
I think that just based on just aesthetics and basic genetics, I would say that their bloodlines could trace back to Nimrod. I believe that he was probably the first big Nephilim king after the flood. I mean, it does say in Genesis 6 that the Nephilim were in those days and also afterwards, which I believe it's saying before the flood and after the flood. So however the Nephilim kept their bloodlines together, I believe in the possibility of a second incursion. I believe that maybe that's where you get the second pantheon of gods, where you have Zeus is the god of gods to the antediluvian world, or not to the antediluvian, but the post-diluvian world. Because before you have like the stories of like the Titans. And it's very interesting that in Peter's epistle, he draws on Greek mythology when he's saying that these angels are locked up in Tartarus. So that's where the old pantheon of gods were, which makes sense to me that the old pantheon was the Watchers from the Book of Enoch, the first incursion that started the flood. So then afterwards, the god ancestors are under the earth, but then later you have the second pantheon that's ruled by Zeus, and Zeus to the Babylonians would have been Bel or Marduk, and he had many different names depending on the kind of culture you had. And so even his son Apollo was not fully a god. Did you ever know that in the mythology?
I did not know.
Yeah, Apollo's mom was like kind of like a half breed. I think she was kind of a Nephilim, but even Baal was partially human too.
Yeah, demigod, right?
Yeah, right. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's like this idea of that a lot of people draw like the sun god mythologies to a Nimrod, to his son Tammuz, and then that's when you get into, Zeus is the god of gods, but his son Apollo is the sun god, but it was replaced the original sun god, which was Helios. So that being said, so if there was Nephilim after the flood, then their bloodline still could have some kind of remnants of the times of Nimrod, even still today. And
oh, yeah.
I guess regardless, they seem like they believe it. And that is obviously driving them to this agenda that is completely spirit of Antichrist.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. You just brought up Apollo. I live in Los Angeles County next to a city called El Segundo. And many people don't know that's home to the aerospace industry and the military industrial complex. I mean, you have companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, SpaceX. You have the control center of Space Force there. It's really huge. And I was driving through it the other day, and I saw a couple streets that seemed out of place. One was the street Apollo Street.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was Isis Ave.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, oh, this is weird. And what's the weird part about this is a couple cities over in Seal Beach, you have a Boeing campus there. And I have my mobile ministry, or what I call Uber, and I was picking somebody up on that thing. And what do you know? I was picking them up on Apollo Street that's on that campus. And then I want to say, I want to check this out. So I zoomed into MapQuest real quick. And what do you know? They also have another street there named Saturn Way.
Right. Well, so the original rockets that powered the space program were the Saturn rockets. And of course, the original moon mission was the Apollo moon mission.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting that supposedly they got to the moon during Apollo 11. And if you research anything about Crowley, he considered 11 as being the magic number.
Oh, wow.
Right? Yeah. Like that's why he spelled magic with a K, because K is the 11th letter in the alphabet. And it's funny, you just even think about like the kind of gematria and the numerology that they believe in, that when they had the Apollo 13 moon mission, that was the unlucky one, right? That's the one where they almost all died. But the lucky mission was 11 when they actually made it. And so now they have the new mission to the moon, which is called Artemis, which is Apollo's twin sister, who's the goddess of the moon.
Question, do you think that 13 actually could be a good number, and in their inversion they took it out and made it a bad one?
I'm trying to think of like biblically if there's a 13. I want to say it's always kind of been associated with some kind of a rebellion. It's kind of funny to think like there's godly numbers, and the satanic numbers are usually some kind of one off of them. You think about 7 being a holy number, then 6 being shown as not a holy number. 12 is also a godly number associated with completion. 7 is associated with completion. And 70 is associated with completion. 69 is usually not viewed as a great number or a godly number. 13 is bad. 11 is not good. So I just think that there's something about that where I don't, help me if I'm wrong, anybody in the comments, if there's anything in the Bible that's used as 13 as being good.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. So we're closing up. I want to ask you one more question about the short season before we kind of wrap this up. I always found it interesting because, like I said, I watch your work, and you draw this parallel between the Orphan trains and the World's Fair. You want to go into there real quick and talk about that and how that plays in the little season?
Yeah, well, again, that's a longer conversation, but
okay.
But just to kind of summarize real quickly, what a lot of people have looked into when they've looked into the old world or Tartaria is that the 1800s, the 19th century, is the craziest century. Like if you try to read some of the history about it, it seems nonsensical, honestly. It seems like the amount of things that we're told that happen in this short timeline is the things that have changed the whole world completely. Now, when you start to look at the architecture and you look at some of the building dates, in America specifically, you look at almost all these buildings were supposedly founded, and they always use that word founded, which is interesting, just the way that if I constructed a building, I would not say it was founded in 2026. I would say that it was built in 2026. Yeah. But they all have these cornerstones by these Freemasons that say these buildings were founded. And so a lot of people believe or disbelieve the history about these buildings will say, no way. They did not build those buildings with hammer and chisel, horses and buggies. Makes no sense. So then that leads to the conclusion that what if these cities were already here in America, Australia, and a lot of the places around the world, that they don't make sense based on the timeline we're told? What if they were found, as in founded? And these cities, when you actually see some of the earliest pictures of these cities, they are completely abandoned looking. There's the earliest pictures, there's no people in almost any of these pictures. Like from the 1850s, places in Europe, places in America, they're very eerie pictures of these massive buildings, almost sometimes in the middle of nowhere with no people around. San Francisco, I always bring up San Francisco. There's a very famous panoramic shot in the 1870s in San Francisco, and the whole city's built out. Not one building under construction, no scaffolding, no people in the streets, no animals in the streets, no horses and carts, nothing. And this is supposedly would have been 20 years after San Francisco started to be inhabited. So the theory with the orphan trains would be that maybe that there was some kind of another reset, maybe sometime around the late 1700s, like around 1776, things were reset, and then there was this repopulation effort to get these cities back working again. So the orphan trains, I want to say it was between 1850 or 1860 and 1920. There was 250,000 children going on orphan trains across the country. And I think that makes no sense. We're told that there was orphans in the eastern part of America, and they put them on trains and sent them out west. Like, logistically, that makes no sense. Taking care of that many kids would have been a nightmare, logistically. Altogether, it would have been a massive undertaking. So when you see some of these pictures of these early factories and fields, you see children working in them. Children who are not tall enough to work the levers in the machines. And then there's hardly ever any adults in these pictures. It's like that what you see in a lot of these old pictures, and even like the earliest videos, you see the people look like aristocrats in the pictures. They all look dressed to the nines. The women are wearing their beautiful dresses. Men are wearing top hats. They're wearing coats and suits. And they almost look like they're tourists in these places. So it seems like that I started to draw the conclusions. I wonder if this was an aristocrat class, and these are not the people who are going to be working. They weren't commoners. So they needed people to be their workforce. So then if you look into like the world fairs, which is another crazy one, where if you look at cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Omaha, San Francisco, Philadelphia, all around the whole country, in the 1800s, early 1900s, there are these world fairs that these cities have tons of buildings that look Greco-Roman, look amazing. And we're told historically that these are all just, they're temporary buildings. They're almost like Hollywood sets or something. They're made of wood and plaster and wire, and they're more like veneers. That doesn't pass the smell test for me. Supposedly they built these cities, like 200 buildings, like in Chicago, the Columbia exhibition in 1893. St. Louis had the Louisiana Purchase exhibition, and that was 1904. And they are just immaculate. They're massive. They're the biggest buildings in the whole world. And we're meant to believe that they're all temporary. But in some of these exhibits, they also had incubator babies. And they were these exhibits.
Like from a Brave New World?
It's so weird. Like, it's so macabre to think about that. Like that people are paying good money to go look at preemie babies.
Yeah.
And so we've wondered, is that also kind of like a idea of like, this is where this repopulation effort was? Where did these babies come from? Like, who gave up their babies to be viewed as an exhibit? And you get into like the idea of this old kind of art of these Cabbage Patch Kids, that kids are growing in fields. They're plucking them out of wells and lakes. Storks are bringing them. That's where that whole kind of mythos of like the stork came from. Is like the babies. Why did people ever think that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's something you might tell a kid, or at least as we're told, that they told children that's where babies came from. But it was like these babies did not really have a good explanation where they came from. They call these babies foundlings sometimes. It's like they found babies or they took babies. And what was also going on around the same time as the orphan trains was the sane asylums, which we really don't have today. But at the same time that 250,000 children were going on orphan trains, there was 125,000 people being locked up in insane asylums. And some of the reasons they gave for why they locked people up was like religious zealotry and things like that.
Oh, so you're thinking people who were telling the truth, they locked them up?
That's what makes sense. And it makes sense that maybe that maths where the people wonder where these kids came from. What if they came from the people who got locked up in the asylums? And when you look at the historic buildings that were orphanages and also insane asylums, they look like medieval castles.
Yeah, who built those?
Makes no sense that you would build this castle to lock up crazy people or to house orphans. So I think that what I've done through my research, at least the conclusions I've started to draw, is that those buildings that were orphanages and insane asylums, which are none of them are in use today. I believe that those buildings were found, they were already here, and then they were repurposed. And I think that altogether, I think that makes more sense, even about all the historic buildings, that when you look at the timelines of these buildings, where a lot of the most impressive buildings in these old cities had like a 1 year timeline, sometimes longer than that, but a lot of times it was like 1 year. In a very primitive time, again, horse and buggy times, hammers and chisels. I think maybe the 1 year timeline is when it was founded and when it was repurposed and refurbished, and then later it was used for something else. But that was never the original intent of these buildings.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, even as a premillennialist, and I look at some of these buildings in America, and to your point, the timelines that they, gave, they said they built them or founded them. Clearly, I don't think the story adds up. So it's a matter of when were these built? Who built these? It was either, in my opinion, the Millennial Kingdom, or I think it might have been when, in Deuteronomy, when God created the nations and separated everybody. I mean, who knows what type of buildings they built out back then, but I'm with you. It doesn't make sense.
There's no telling. And the thing that was really striking to me about like this whole kind of concept of like the founded cities was just when I really actually did do some research. Again, my research was never intent on proving this stuff. It was more like I wanted good answers. And these are the kind of things that we were never taught in school about. Because 1776, when you're a kid, it sounds like forever ago. But we're not talking about that many generations ago where we would have been go back to the times of what we're told is George Washington. And so when Thomas Jefferson made a deal with Napoleon for the Louisiana Purchase, this idea was that Lewis and Clark were going to go explore this new territory that we bought from the French. And they went across the Mississippi, they went down the Missouri River to go explore the western part of America. This was the early 1800s. And so I think that was like really mind-blowing to me. I was like, wait a minute. So nobody really lived in these western cities in 1800? So then by the time you see the founding dates of these cities out west, like San Francisco in 1848 had 1,000 people. Like cities like Seattle and Portland were founded like somewhere around the 1850s. So all these western cities all have these timelines where these cities are literally only like 170 years old. But when you see the first pictures of them, they're all fully developed.
Built out.
Yeah. Fully built out. So I think that's why when you really think about it, and I said, I really wish somebody who was maybe good with AI or was really good with math and spreadsheets, if you just kind of took the building dates of all these buildings in all these major cities, you would find out so many of them were supposedly being built at the exact same time. And you have to think
the manpower.
And you have to think about this too, is that what we're told is in the 1860s, we fought a civil war. So you're telling me during that time is when all these cities were being built. I don't know if historically that makes any sense at all. I mean, because you think about if these were American cities, that the Union would not have conscripted these people to go fight for the Union. They're letting them just go do whatever they want out west. And so, yeah, I started to think like that some of these old Western movies are just propaganda, because that's what they want you to think about the 1800s. But you don't realize that when you watch a show like, was it 1883, that Yellowstone spinoff? When they show the journey on the Oregon Trail, which is one thing they do teach you in school, right? Is how dangerous to go from Texas it was to Oregon. But meanwhile, in 1883, these cities were cosmopolitan. They were all built out. But they want you to think that it was just cowboys and Indians in just this completely rugged place. But the cities were there, all of them, by 1883. And so you watch like if you watch a movie like Tombstone, that's kind of what you picture in the 1880s or 1890s. You picture like wood veneers on all these kind of strip mall looking buildings. You don't picture Greco-Roman buildings and Gothic cathedrals, medieval castles, and all that stuff. But sure enough, history says all that stuff existed right at the same time that they were fighting in the OK Corral. It's crazy. I mean, yeah. I think it feels like that. That's what they want you to believe. But yeah, when you actually kind of put all this stuff together, you're like, how did they fit in all this stuff in this certain timeline? And my conclusion is they didn't. It's a lie.
No, I agree with you there 100%. I think all of history is a lie. And it's amazing how fast I think propaganda can take hold on people and that they forget what really happened. I just point at 9/11. It's amazing how this generation of young people don't even really realize what happened. And if they have any idea, they think it was those terrorists that came and blew up the World Trade Center. And to your point, it's kind of like the same thing with those Western movies. It's all propaganda for you to think something took place that didn't.
Right. Well, and so yeah, people often wonder, is like, well, how did they ever hide this stuff? Well, again, if the insane asylum is a good theory, is like that a lot of people who were dissenting could have got put in those. Even if you think about even some of the stories historically about America, a lot of these people were immigrants when they came in here, so they had no idea what was here.
Yeah.
They came into Liberty Island and Ellis Island in New York. They had no idea what was here. And then if you think about like some of the founding of these Western cities, if they really did ship all these children out there to be the working class, well, you got to tell them a history, any history you wanted to tell them.
Yeah.
So then some people say, well, what about the Native Americans? What would they have said? Well, their history is a lie too. I mean, even it's funny, I was watching that show, Yellowstone, and they're talking about like so if you've ever seen that show, it's about these guys who had this, in this family, they had this gigantic ranch in Montana. And then there's this battle between him and some of the other powerful people there, but also the reservations. And so the Indians are telling this story where it was our land before them, but they never built anything on this land. There's nothing historically to be able to tie them to this land, because we're told these people were just nomads and they went from teepee to teepee and they moved around based on, I guess, I don't know, the buffalo.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? But like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if you have a family and you're a man who wants to protect your family, at some point you might build a permanent structure.
Yeah.
It might be easier to defend than a tent. You know what I'm saying? So like, we also have the reservations, right? Where like, who knows? And eventually they gave them like booze and gambling. And so how many generations need to be, to die off before all the history we have is literally just what they tell us?
Yeah. It's crazy. Well, I think we're coming to an end here, and I always enjoy our conversations. And thank you when you have me on your podcast, and hopefully we can do this some more.
Absolutely,
I think,
of course,
to your point, we agree on a lot more than we disagree. And at the end of the day, I think we both focus on the Great Commission. I think that's the most important thing. So you just want to say any last words, any message to the audience, and where they can find you?
Well, yeah, I would just encourage people. Again, you don't have to trust anything that I say. I always tell people, like, do your own research. These are some of the conclusions I've come to. And I'm still open to the possibility that I'm wrong about some of the things. These things make the most sense to me. And I like that you're open to some of this stuff, because I think regardless if you believe where we are in the timeline, I think that these questions deserve like legitimate answers. And I don't think they deserve to be just denied. That's crazy. This is established fact, because as you know, that fake news turns into fake history. So if you can't trust the news today, how could you ever trust history that's 50 years old, 100 years old, 200 years old, 1,000 years old? So I encourage people to read their Bibles, read it with understanding. I encourage people to read it with the audience relevancy, the context, who these letters and who these scrolls were originally written to. Read it for that. And don't let some man behind some pulpit tell you what it means. Let the Holy Spirit lead you to truth. And I believe that if you do that, then yeah, we can disagree about some of these things. And I think that we can still be brothers and sisters in Christ, because we all validate the Bible. We all believe it's true. So if you believe it's true and you believe in Jesus, then you're my brother and my sister. So I think that we're all just trying to do our best, because regardless, again, if we're in the little season or not, I don't think anyone would deny that we're in a deceptive time.
Yeah.
So we need to give grace for each other as we try to grow and learn in this time. So yeah, and if you guys are interested in any of the things I was talking about today, I've done hundreds of hours of stuff about this on my podcast. You can check me out on YouTube, JT Follows JC. And if you like shorter stuff, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And also, if you'd like to listen to podcasts, check me out on Apple or Spotify. Look up JT's Mixtape and you'll find me. So anyways, Ben, I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you once again. And that's all we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. And God bless to everyone.